Welcome to this story, where we journey through the life of a Viking fisherman living by the tranquil fjords, surrounded by the deep, rhythmic pulse of nature. Each day, he rises at dawn, wrapped in the comfort of tradition, setting off on his boat to fish the cold northern waters. His life is one of quiet reverence for the sea, the land, and the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons. As he mends nets, adjusts lines, and gathers his catch, he moves through a world untouched by haste, where every action is a reflection of patience and respect for nature's generosity. The fjord, with its towering cliffs and whispering forests, serves as the perfect backdrop for his solitary work. With each day's catch, he returns home, grateful for the balance between taking and preserving, and the simple joys of hearth and kin. This peaceful, meditative life unfolds with each passing day, inviting you to relax and drift into the timeless embrace of nature. As the soft light of dawn begins to filter through the misty morning sky, the peaceful silence of the fjord is slowly broken by the awakening of the Viking fisherman. Wrapped in thick woolen garments and sturdy leather boots, he steps outside. His modest wooden cottage, breathing deeply the crisp, salt-tinged air that carries the mingled scents of pine, earth, and sea, reminder of the timeless bond between the land and water that has sustained generations of his kin. The village stirs softly around him. As neighbors begin to stir in their humble homes, the crackling of hearth fires rekindled in preparation for the day's work, and the distant cries of seabirds, weaving a natural melody that signals the beginning of another day. At the water's edge, his boat lies in wait, its dark oak hull worn by countless voyages across the cold northern seas, each scar a testament to the many storms weathered and tides navigated. With practiced hands, the fisherman gathers his essential tools, nets woven from the fibers of the land, hooks sharpened by generations of skilled hands, and ropes coiled with reverence for their task. He steps aboard, the familiar sway of the vessel beneath his feet grounding him in the rhythm of the sea. The rhythmic splash of the oars as he pushes away from the rocky shore fills the air, marking the steady passage of time in a world ruled not by clocks, but by the tides, the seasons, and the eternal cycle of the sea and sky. As the boat glides through the still waters of the fjord, the cliffs rise like ancient sentinels, draped in moss and lichen, while pine forests sway gently in the cool morning breeze. The fisherman's keen eyes scan the horizon, watching for subtle signs that the fish are near. With calm patience, he casts his nets wide, the delicate threads unfurling gracefully over the water, like webs designed to gather only what the sea freely offers, honoring the sacred balance between taking and preserving. Time flows gently in this tranquil world, measured by the rise and fall of the tide, while the fisherman moves with quiet purpose, mending his nets with nimble fingers, adjusting lines with precision, and tending his gear with a deep respect for the natural world that sustains him. Each movement is a meditation on patience and resilience, and the solitude of the fjord embraces him, offering peace in a world untouched by haste or noise. The baskets fill steadily with shimmering fish, their scales catching the soft light. Like scattered jewels, each one treated gently as a humble gift from the deep. As the sun climbs higher, warming the cool northern air, the fisherman leans back against the weathered wood of his boat, eyes closed to the vast sky above, breathing, in time with the gentle rocking of the vessel and the soothing pulse of the sea. This quiet moment of reflection wraps around him like a soft cloak, grounding him in the timeless connection between man and nature. The promise of hearth and kin calls to him, and with his catch secured, he turns the boat toward home, the steady oars guiding him back through the tranquil fjord, his heart light with the bounty of the sea. As the first rays of the sun stretch over the horizon, casting a pale golden hue upon the still waters of the fjord. The Viking fisherman awakens once again to the familiar symphony of the world around him. The crisp air carries the scent of Havai, pine and salt water, mixing with the earthy aroma of the land as he rises from his bed. The soft creak of the wooden floor beneath his boots, the only sound in his quiet home. Wrapped in thick woolen layers and leather boots, he steps outside, his breath forming small clouds in the morning chill as he surveys the peaceful scene before him. The village, nestled at the edge of the fjord, stirs softly as the first signs of life emerge, smoke rising from chimneys as fires are kindled, neighbors stepping outside to begin their day's labor, and the distant calls of seabirds echoing through the air, signaling the beginning of another busy day. His gaze shifts toward the water's edge where his boat lies, waiting patiently as it always does. Its weathered oak hull, a quiet witness to the many seasons it has endured, each scar and crack a testament to the fierce storms and gentle breezes it has weathered. With a practiced hand, he gathers his gear nets woven by his forefathers, with skill passed down through the generations, hooks sharpened with care, and ropes coiled tightly, ready to be used once again. As he steps aboard his boat, the familiar, rocking beneath his feet, steadies his mind, grounding him in the rhythm of the sea. The oars dip into the cool water with a rhythmic splash as the boat begins its journey across the still fjord, the world around him unfolding in a quiet, peaceful manner that feels as though time itself has slowed. The cliffs surrounding the fjord rise like ancient guardians, their moss-covered faces standing firm against the passage of time, while the pine forests sway gently in the breeze, their branches whispering the secrets of the earth. The fisherman's eyes scan the water for signs of the fish he seeks, subtle ripples, flashes of silver scales, or the erratic movements of the seabirds flying low above the surface. His hands move instinctively as he sets the nets, watching them unfurl over the water like intricate webs designed to capture only what the sea offers freely, honoring the delicate balance between taking and preserving. The sun climbs higher in the sky, warming the cool air and casting long shadows across the water as the fisherman moves with steady purpose, mending his nets with nimble fingers, adjusting the lines, and checking his gear with careful precision. Each movement is done with a quiet reverence for the natural world that sustains him, a deep respect for the rhythms of the land and sea that have shaped his life and the lives of his ancestors. The fjord is vast and silent, the solitude offering a rare and precious peace that is uninterrupted by the noise of the outside world. Time moves slowly here, governed not by the ticking of a clock, but by the eternal rise and fall of the tide, the turning of the seasons, and the slow unfolding of the day. The fish begin to gather in the nets, their scales glinting in the soft light of the morning, each one treated with care as the fisherman collects them into baskets. He takes a moment to lean back against the wooden side of his boat, gazing up at the vast sky above, feeling the gentle rocking of the boat beneath him, and listening to the steady rhythm of the oars as they dip into the water. The quiet of the fjord wraps around him like a comforting blanket, grounding him in the timeless connection between man and nature. As the sun climbs higher, the warmth of the day begins to settle over the water, the coolness of the early morning, giving way to a gentle heat that hums softly in the air. With his baskets full and his heart light, the fisherman sets his course back toward the village, the promise of home and hearth calling to him. The oars dip rhythmically into the water as the boat glides through the fjord, the cliffs rising on either side like silent sentinels watching over him as he makes his way home. The peaceful solitude of the journey is a welcome companion, offering a time for quiet reflection as the water laps gently against the boat and the breeze carries the fresh scent of the sea. As he nears the shore, the familiar sight of the village comes into view, smoke curling from the chimneys and the sounds of daily life rising in the distance. The fisherman feels a deep sense of satisfaction in the simple, steady rhythm of his. Work in the quiet peace that comes from being in tune with the natural world around him. As he guides the boat back to its resting place at the water's edge, the promise of home, family, and rest awaits him. The nets are secured, the fish are safely stowed away, and the rhythm of the sea slowly fades into the quiet of the evening, where the fisherman can rest, knowing that tomorrow will bring yet another day, another rhythm to follow, in the never-ending dance between man and nature. As the day begins to fade, the last remnants of sunlight spill across the fjord, turning the water into a sheet of gold and orange. The wind, once gentle and cool, now carries with it the crispness of evening, a reminder that another day is drawing to a close. The fisherman, his face weathered by years of sun and salt, moves steadily toward his cottage after securing his boat. The sound of his boots crunching against the gravel path is the only noise in the quiet evening, the village having already settled into its evening rhythm. The distant crackle of hearth fires and the soft murmur of neighbors returning to their homes fill the air, offering a comforting sense of routine. The fisherman steps inside his modest cottage, where the fire is already burning brightly, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. The smell of bread baking and stew simmering on the hearth greets him, and his stomach growls softly in response, reminded of the simple pleasures that await. He sheds his heavy woolen cloak, hanging it on the rack by the door, and moves toward the hearth where his family awaits. His wife, a woman of quiet strength, smiles at him from across the room, her hands busy preparing the evening meal. The soft clinking of metal against stone as she stirs the pot is the rhythm of home, familiar and grounding. His children are nearby, laughing as they play on the wooden floor, the sound of their joy mixing with the crackling fire. The fisherman sinks into a chair by the hearth, feeling the warmth seep into his bones, the ache of the day's labor melting away in the comforting glow. He exchanges a few words with his wife, his voice low and steady, recounting the day's catch, the weather, and the ever-present pull of the sea. There is a quiet peace in their conversation, a shared understanding that comes from years of living. Side by side, they are partners in this life, each bearing the weight of the land and sea in their own way. As the evening unfolds, the fisherman finds himself lost in thought, his gaze drawn to the soft flicker of the fire. His mind drifts beyond the walls of the cottage, beyond the familiar shores of the fjord, to the open waters, the endless horizon. That calls to him in ways he cannot fully explain. It is not just the promise of a day's catch, or the rhythm of the tides that pulls at him. It is the deep, unspoken longing for the vastness beyond, the uncharted waters that lie beyond thee. Fjord's embrace. There are days, especially in the quiet moments of evening, when he finds himself yearning for that distant place, the wild, untamed world that lies just beyond the reach of his boat. He knows the sea like the back of his hand, its moods, its rhythms, its depths. Yet there is always something new to discover, something just beyond the horizon, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. He has sailed these waters for years, but still, the sea calls to him, urging him to venture further, to find what lies beyond the familiar shores. It is a pull he cannot resist, a longing that stirs deep within him. His wife, sensing the shift, in his thoughts, looks up from her work, her eyes soft with understanding. She knows this longing well, for it has always been a part of him. She knows the sea calls to him in ways she cannot fully comprehend, but she has come to accept it, to understand it as a part of who he is. She offers him a quiet smile, a gesture of reassurance and support, knowing that one day he will once again feel the pull of the sea, that the horizon will call to him once more. The fisherman nods in return, his heart lightened by the simple comfort of her presence. He does not speak of it, but he knows that the time will come when he will set out again, when the call of the horizon will be too strong to ignore. Until then, he will continue his life, tending to his nets, guiding his boat through the fjord, providing for his family. But deep inside, he knows that the sea will always be there, waiting, calling, a promise of something more just beyond the horizon. As the evening stretches on, the fire crackles and pops, casting a soft glow on the walls of the cottage. The sound of his children's laughter fades as they are tucked into bed, their small forms curling beneath the warm blankets. The fisherman rises, his bones stiff from the long day, and moves to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain to look out at the fjord. The water, now a deep blue under the night sky, stretches out before him, the stars reflecting on its surface like scattered gems. The mountains rise on the far side of the fjord, their jagged peaks silhouetted against the night sky, the cliffs standing as silent sentinels, guarding the fjord, the village, and all that lies within. The fisherman stands there for a moment, lost in the quiet beauty of the scene. He takes a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs, and feels the familiar pull of the sea deep within him. It is a feeling he cannot escape, one that has been with him since his youth, since the first time he set foot on a boat and felt the sway of the ocean beneath him. It is the call of the horizon, the promise of adventure, of discovery, of the endless possibilities that lie just beyond the reach of his familiar world. As he stands there, gazing out over the fjord, he knows that one day, when the time is right, he will answer that call. But for now, he is content. He has his family, his home, and the sea that sustains him. And yet, the horizon remains, ever distant, ever beckoning, a promise of something greater, something unknown. He turns away from the window and moves back toward the hearth, the warmth of the fire, a comforting reminder of the life he has chosen. But even as he settles back into his chair, the horizon lingers in his mind, a quiet, unspoken invitation to the adventure that lies ahead. The air was thick with the scent of salt and pine as the fisherman stepped out into the crisp morning light, the weight of the day ahead pressing on his shoulders. The fjord, usually calm and serene, was already beginning to churn with a hint of restlessness. The wind had shifted, picking up in gusts that seemed to warn of something brewing on the horizon. The morning sky, once clear and peaceful, now carried the faintest trace of gray, a harbinger of the storm it was slowly making its way toward the village. The fisherman, who had spent years on these waters, could feel it in his bones. Something was coming. He walked down to the shore, his boots crunching against the gravel, and surveyed the scene before him. The boat, his trusted companion for countless journeys, rocked gently in the water, as if it too sensed the change in the air. The village was still quiet, the only sounds the distant calls of seabirds and the soft lap of the water against the shore. His family, still asleep, remained, unaware of the storm's approach, and for a moment he allowed himself a fleeting thought of what would happen if it came early. The village, isolated by the vast expanse of water and surrounded by the looming cliffs of the fjord, had always been vulnerable to the sudden changes in weather that could sweep in without warning. A storm could strike without much time to prepare. And while the villagers were resilient, they were not immune to the wild forces of nature that governed their world. The fisherman knew this all too well. He had seen the seas turn violent in a matter of hours, with waves that seemed to rise from nowhere and winds that howled like a living thing, capable of tearing the sails from ships and capsizing even the moon. Most steadfast of vessels, he had been caught in storms before, had battled the elements with nothing but his strength and the will to survive. But there was something different in the air today. He could feel the weight of it, as if the storm, was already gathering strength far off in the distance, and with each passing minute, it was drawing closer. Taking a deep breath, he moved toward his boat, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision as he checked the lines and ropes, making sure everything was secure. The nets, the oars, the sails, everything had to be ready. His heart quickened as he worked, knowing that even if the storm held off, the seas would become unpredictable. He had to prepare, just in case. There was no time for hesitation when the sea was involved. It demanded respect, and it gave nothing in return but the possibility of survival, if one was lucky. As he finished checking the boat, he paused for a moment, his gaze drifting across the fjord. The wind picked up again, swirling in a way that sent a shiver through him. It was time to go, time to cast his nets and return before the storm arrived. He turned toward the village one last time, before stepping into the boat, feeling the familiar sway of the vessel beneath him. The first gusts of wind swept across the water, carrying with them the promise of something much more dangerous. With a steady hand, the fisherman untied the ropes and began to row, his oars cutting through the water with ease as he moved away from the shore. The fjord stretched out before him, its waters now rippling with the beginnings of the storms. The sky above had turned a pale shade of gray, the clouds thickening as the wind continued to rise. His thoughts, always sharp and focused on the task at hand, drifted to his family back at the village. He hoped they would be safe, that the storm would pass without causing harm. But the storm had a mind of its own, and no one, not even the most experienced of fishermen, could predict its fury. The waters around him began to darken, the surface no longer reflecting the soft light of the sun, but rather the foreboding shades of the approaching tempest. The fisherman's hands tightened on the oars, his body moving in sync with the boat, guiding it through the water. His breath came in steady, controlled bursts, as if to match the rhythm of the sea. As he rowed, his mind wandered back to the times when he was younger, when the thrill of the storm had once filled him with excitement. In his youth, he had seen the storm as a challenge, a test of his strength and skill. But now, with age and experience weighing on him, he had come to view the storm with a healthy respect, a realization that the sea was far more powerful than any man could be. It was unpredictable, capricious, and could change in the blink of an eye. The first drops of rain began to fall, light at first, but growing heavier with each passing minute. The fisherman pushed forward, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of what was to come. The air smelled of moisture and earth, thick and heavy, and the wind had grown sharper, more biting. He could feel the storm's energy building, like the calm before a battle. The sea, which had been gentle just hours before, was now becoming restless, its surface churning with small waves that slapped against the sides of the boat. The fisherman's heart raced as he rowed harder, feeling the tug of the oars as they met the growing swell. He knew the storm was close now, and there would be no turning back. His mind was sharp, his instincts honed by years of experience. He would navigate this storm like all the others. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this one would be different. This one might be the storm that changed everything. The first true gust of wind hit him with force, pushing against the boat and sending a shudder through the wood. The fisherman braced himself, his hands gripping the oars tighter as the boat was tossed from side to side. The waves were rising, now their crests sharp and threatening, and the rain began to fall in sheets, a curtain of water that obscured his view. The storm had arrived, and there was no time to waste. The fisherman fought to keep control of the boat, steering it through the waves, his body tense with the effort. The sound of the wind howling in his ears was deafening, and the sea seemed to roar in response, its power on full display. But through it all, the fisherman's focus remained unbroken. He had been here before, and he would survive this, just like all the storms before. As the storm raged on, the fisherman knew that he was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for his way of life, for the legacy of the men and women who had come before him, and for the future of the village that depended on the sea. With each stroke of the oars, he pushed forward, determined to face the storm head-on, and emerge victorious. The battle was far from over, but he would fight it with everything he had. The storm was a part of his world, a force of nature that he had learned to live with, and he would not let it defeat him. As the sky darkened further and the wind howled louder, the fisherman's resolve only strengthened. He would see it through, no matter what. The storm had arrived, but so had he, and he would not back down. The horizon was still his to reach, and he would not let the storm take that away from him. As the first rays of the sun stretch over the horizon, casting a pale golden hue upon the still waters of the fjord, the Viking fisherman awakens once again to the familiar symphony of the world around him. The crisp air carries the scent of Havai, pine and salt water, mixing with the earthy aroma of the land as he rises from his bed, the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath his boots, the only sound in his quiet home. Wrapped in thick woolen layers and leather boots, he steps outside, his breath forming small clouds in the morning chill as he surveys the peaceful scene before him. The village, nestled at the edge of the fjord, stirs softly as the first signs of life emerge, smoke rising from chimneys as fires are kindled, neighbors stepping outside to begin their day's labor, and the distant calls of seabirds echoing through the air, signaling the beginning of another busy day. His gaze shifts toward the water's edge where his boat lies, waiting patiently as it always does, its weathered oak hull, a quiet witness to the many seasons it has endured, each scar and crack a testament to the fierce storms and gentle breezes it has weathered. With a practiced hand, he gathers his gear nets woven by his forefathers, with skill passed down through the generations, hooks sharpened with care, and ropes coiled tightly, ready to be used once again. As he steps aboard his boat, the familiar, rocking beneath his feet, steadies his mind, grounding him in the rhythm of the sea. The oars dip into the cool water with a rhythmic splash as the boat begins its journey across the still fjord, the world around him unfolding in a quiet, peaceful manner that feels as though time itself has slowed. The cliffs surrounding the fjord rise like ancient guardians, their moss-covered faces standing firm against the passage of time, while the pine forests sway gently in the breeze, their branches whispering the secrets of the earth. The fisherman's eyes scan the water for signs of the fish he seeks, subtle ripples, flashes of silver scales, or the erratic movements of the seabirds flying low above the surface. His hands move instinctively as he sets the nets, watching them unfurl over the water like intricate webs designed to capture only what the sea offers freely, honoring the delicate balance between taking and preserving. The sun climbs higher in the sky, warming the cool air and casting long shadows across the water as the fisherman moves with steady purpose, mending his nets with nimble fingers, adjusting the lines, and checking his gear with careful precision. Each movement is done with a quiet reverence for the natural world that sustains him, a deep respect for the rhythms of the land and sea that have shaped his life and the lives of his ancestors. The fjord is vast and silent, the solitude offering a rare and precious peace that is uninterrupted by the noise of the outside world. Time moves slowly here, governed not by the ticking of a clock, but by the eternal rise and fall of the tide, the turning of the seasons, and the slow unfolding of the day. The fish begin to gather in the nets, their scales glinting in the soft light of the morning, each one treated with care as the fisherman collects them into baskets. He takes a moment to lean back against the wooden side of his boat, gazing up at the vast sky above, feeling the gentle rocking of the boat beneath him. and listening to the steady rhythm of the oars as they dip into the water. The quiet of the fjord wraps around him like a comforting blanket, grounding him in the timeless connection between man and nature. As the sun climbs higher, the warmth of the day begins to settle over the water, the coolness of the early morning, giving way to a gentle heat that hums softly in the air. With his baskets full and his heart light, the fisherman sets his course back toward the village, the promise of home and hearth calling to him. The oars dip rhythmically into the water as the boat glides through the fjord, the cliffs rising, on either side like silent sentinels watching over him as he makes his way home. The peaceful solitude of the journey is a welcome companion, offering a time for quiet reflection as the water laps gently against the boat and the breeze carries the fresh scent of the sea. As he nears the shore, the familiar sight of the village comes into view, smoke curling from the chimneys and the sounds of daily life rising in the distance. The fisherman feels a deep sense of satisfaction in the simple, steady rhythm of his work, in the quiet peace that comes from being in tune with the natural world around him. As he guides the boat back to its resting place at the water's edge, the promise of home, family, and rest awaits him. The nets are secured, the fish are safely stowed away, and the rhythm of the sea slowly fades into the quiet of the evening, where the fisherman can rest, knowing that tomorrow will bring yet another day, another rhythm to follow in the never-ending dance between man and nature. The fjord lay silent in the aftermath of the storm. The waters now eerily calm, as though the sea itself was recovering from the wild rage it had unleashed just hours before. The sky, once dark and ominous, now stretched out in soft shades of lavender and pale blue, the storm clouds dissipating as quickly as they had come. The Viking fisherman stood at the edge of his boat, still trembling from the exertion and fear he had experienced during the tumultuous battle with the storm. His heart, though still racing, had begun to slow, and his senses, once sharpened by the immediacy of survival, now started to take in the beauty of the calm that had followed the fury. The sea, once a ferocious adversary, now appeared as a peaceful mirror reflecting the now clear sky. The only sounds that could be heard were the distant calls of seabirds as they circled above the water, and the soft lapping of the waves against the boat's hull. The fisherman took a deep breath, allowing the fresh, cool air to fill his lungs, grounding him in the moment. He had survived, yes, but he knew this tranquility would be short-lived. The sea was fickle, always ready to shift its mood with little warning, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down entirely. Yet there was something almost sacred about the stillness that surrounded him now. It was as if the very world had exhaled with him, as if the storm itself was a reminder of the raw power of nature and the fragile relationship between man and the elements. It was a humbling experience, and though his body ached with exhaustion, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life he led, one that was always intertwined with the rhythms of the natural world, for better or worse. The fisherman, despite his weariness, couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at the sheer scale of the forces he had just witnessed. He had battled the storm, but it was the sea that had ultimately shown him mercy, allowing him to find refuge in the shelter of the narrow inlet. His boat, though battered, had endured, its sturdy oak frame still intact. The nets and ropes, now soggy and heavy with salt water, were in desperate need of repair, but the fisherman knew there would be time for that later. For now, he simply allowed himself a moment of peace. He gazed out at the still fjord, watching, as the last remnants of the storm clouds drifted away, revealing the first hints of a golden sunset. The beauty of the scene seemed almost surreal, a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm that had just passed. The cliffs, now bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, seemed to glow with a quiet majesty, their moss-covered surfaces and jagged edges softened by the golden hue. The trees lining the shore stood tall and resolute, their branches swaying gently in the breeze that had replaced the violent gusts of wind. The fisherman felt a profound connection to this land, to the water that had both challenged and nourished him throughout his life. It was in moments like this, when the world seemed to hold its breath, that he could feel the deep roots of his ancestors, those who had sailed these waters long before him. Their struggles, their triumphs, and their resilience were woven into the very fabric of the fjord, and now he was part of that unbroken chain. His thoughts turned to his family back in the village, to the warm hearth and the steady hands that awaited his return. He imagined the concern they would have felt when the storm had first rolled in, the same concern that now mixed with a deep sense of relief, knowing he had made it through. The promise of home was a powerful motivator, and it stirred something in him that made him stand a little taller, even as fatigue pulled at his limbs. His heart swelled with a sense of duty, to return with a catch, to provide, to continue the legacy of his forebears. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the fisherman knew it was time to leave the safety of the inlet and return to the open waters. He had faced the worst of the storm, and now, with the calm of the fjord as his guide, he could make his way home. He gathered the oars, his hands still slightly unsteady from the fight with the storm, but steady enough to guide his boat. With a practiced motion, he pushed the boat back into the open water, feeling the gentle current of the fjord carry him forward. The storm's fury had left its mark on the sea, but now, in the quiet aftermath, the fisherman felt the peace of the waters once more. The boat glided smoothly across the surface, the world around him peaceful and still. It was as if the storm had cleansed the fjord, leaving behind a pristine, untouched landscape. The fisherman allowed the steady rhythm of the oars to lull him into a meditative state, his mind clearing as he focused on each stroke, on the movement of the boat, and the silent promise of home. The journey home felt different now, as though the storm had made it more meaningful, more precious. Every gust of wind that ruffled the water, every ripple that danced along the surface, seemed to remind him of the balance that existed in the world, the ebb and flow of life, the giving and taking of nature, and the enduring spirit of those who lived in harmony with it. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, the fisherman felt a deep sense of peace. He had been tested by the storm, and he had emerged victorious. The road ahead was still long, but for now there was only the quiet beauty of the fjord, the steady pulse of the oars, and the promise of home waiting just beyond the horizon. As the fisherman rowed steadily through the now calmed waters of the fjord, the familiar shores of his village began to emerge from the dusk, their dark silhouettes framed by the dimming light of the setting sun. The wind had turned in his favor, gentle now and cool, a soft caress against his weathered face. He felt a deep connection to the land he was approaching, a bond forged through years of labor and struggle. His boat, once battered by the storm, now seemed to glide effortlessly, as though the sea itself was guiding him home. With each stroke of the oars, the village drew nearer, its low wooden buildings dotting the shoreline, smoke curling up from the hearths, a sign that the villagers were returning to their evening routines. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of children's laughter, the clatter of tools from the blacksmith's forge, and the low murmur of voices carrying through the cool air, all familiar sounds that spoke of comfort and belonging. The smell of burning wood mixed with the salty scent of the sea, and for a moment the fisherman allowed himself to close his eyes, drinking in the richness of the aromas, grounding himself in the sensations that marked the end of another long day. His body ached from the storm, the battle with the waves, the strain of the hours spent rowing, but it was a familiar ache, one that came with a sense of accomplishment. As he neared the shore, he could make out the figures of his family, waiting for him. His wife, standing by the edge of the village, her silhouette outlined by the soft light from their cottage, her figure small but strong, waiting for him with that quiet patience he had always admired. Behind her, their children were playing, their high-pitched voices reaching his ears, full of life and innocence. The sight of them, waiting for his return, filled his heart with a mixture of warmth and pride. He had endured another storm, survived the unyielding grip of the sea, and now he was returning to those who depended on him. This was the cycle of his life, a constant balance between the dangers of the sea and the peaceful rhythm of village life, a life that he cherished despite its hardships. As the boat finally touched the shore, the fisherman hauled it gently onto the rocky beach, the wood of the hull scraping against the pebbles with a familiar sound. He stepped out of the boat with careful movements, his legs stiff and sore from the long journey, but his heart lighter now that he was home. His wife approached him, her face soft with concern, her eyes scanning him for any signs of injury, her hands reaching out to steady him. "You made it back," she said softly, her voice filled with relief. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips, though he was too tired to speak just yet. He could see the questions in her eyes, questions about the storm, about the journey, about whether he had brought back enough for them to survive another week. But he didn't need to answer them now. She already knew the answer. It was in the way he held himself, in the weariness of his body, in the quiet, unspoken bond they shared. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. He smiled, grateful for her strength, for the way she held their family together, even when he was away at sea. He turned to the children, their faces alight with curiosity, eager to hear about the storm, about the fish, about the world beyond the village that they could only imagine. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that seemed to lift the weight of the storm from his shoulders. "Did you catch any big ones, Father?" one of them asked, her voice full of excitement. "The biggest," he replied, his smile widening, as he looked at them. But there were other battles, too, with the waves. He glanced back at the boat, his gaze lingering on the weathered wood that had carried him through the storm. It had been a hard journey, one that had tested him, but it had also reminded him of why he endured this life. It was not just for the fish, not just for the daily toil, but for these moments, these small moments of homecoming, of connection, of love that grounded him when everything else seemed to be in flux. As the family moved toward their cottage, The fisherman allowed himself to be swept up in the rhythm of the evening, his wife preparing a meal, the children playing, the fire crackling in the hearth. The village, though small, was a world unto itself, where every face was known, where the ebb and flow of life were shared between neighbors, where the struggle of survival was not an isolated one, but a collective effort. He could hear the distant sounds of his neighbors, their voices blending into the symphony of village life. It was a peaceful rhythm, a steady pulse that had endured for generations. The fisherman's thoughts drifted back to the storm, to the ferocity of the waves, and to the fragility of his existence. Yet, in that fragility, there was strength. The storm had shown him just how small he was in the grand scheme of the world, how insignificant his individual struggles might seem against the backdrop of nature's vastness. But it had also shown him how, in the face of that enormity, he and his family had endured. They had survived, and they would continue to do so, day by day, wave by wave. That was the true beauty of this life, the resilience, the connection to the land and sea, and the unspoken promise that no matter how many storms came, the village would remain, and so too would they. As the evening deepened, the sky turned a deep blue, and the stars began to twinkle in the heavens above. The fisherman stood outside for a moment. His eyes turned to the vast expanse of the sea, now calm and peaceful under the cover of night. He felt the weight of the storm lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of quiet contentment. He had returned home, and that was enough for now. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own struggles, but for tonight there was rest. There was peace. He turned and entered the warmth of the cottage, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The fire flickered in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the room. His family was gathered around the table, the meal prepared, the day's work done. It was the quiet rhythm of life, and in it the fisherman found his greatest comfort. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, casting its first light over the fjord, the fisherman awoke to the soft sound of birdsong and the distant crash of waves against the shore. It was a familiar, comforting sound, the rhythm of the villages. Natural world, and he let it ease him out of his sleep, though his body was still heavy with the weight of the storm. The weariness lingered in his bones, but there was a quiet satisfaction in it, a reminder of the battles he had fought and the strength he had drawn from them. He stretched his limbs carefully, feeling the muscles tighten and relax with each movement, and then rose from his bed, the warm light of the early morning spilling into the small cottage. His wife was already awake, bustling around the hearth, preparing the first meal of the day. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the sharp, cool scent of the sea that drifted in through the open window. She smiled at him as he moved toward the table, her eyes warm with the quiet strength he had come to rely on. The children were still asleep, their bodies sprawled across the floor in the comfortable chaos of childhood. His heart softened at the sight of them, their innocent faces untouched by the storms that had shaken him, their world still full of wonder and possibility. He sat down at the table, watching his wife prepare their meal, the rhythm of her movements as familiar to him as the beat of his own heart. She was a constant presence in his life, steady and unwavering, her love for their family evident in every action she took. In the years they had spent together, she had become his anchor, the one who kept him grounded, even when the storms of life threatened to sweep him away. As she placed a bowl of steaming porridge in front of him, he reached for it gratefully, savoring the warmth of the food and the comfort of her presence. The morning passed slowly, as mornings often did in the village. The fisherman spent some time tending to his nets, mending the small tears that had appeared during the storm, his hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years mastering the craft. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The warmth of the day beginning to spread across the land, but the fisherman paid little attention to the passing of time. His thoughts were elsewhere, lingering on the events of the previous day. The storm had tested him, had pushed him to the limits of his strength and resolve, but it had also shown him something important, something he had always known, but had never fully embraced. Life on the sea was a delicate balance between strength and humility, between knowing when to fight and when to surrender, between taking and giving. The fisherman had spent much of his life on the water, battling the waves, conquering the elements, but he had never stopped to truly reflect on the deeper meaning of his work. It was not just about survival, about catching fish to feed his family. It was about a connection to something much larger than himself. It was about honoring the rhythm of nature, the cycles of life and death, and understanding his place within it all. He had always known that the sea was a powerful force, but now, after the storm, he understood it in a new way. It was not something to be conquered, not something to be mastered. It was something to be respected, something that demanded patience and humility. As the morning wore on, the fisherman found himself lost in thought, his hands still working, but his mind drifting far away. He thought about the other fishermen in the village, about their shared struggles and victories, and about the unspoken bond that tied them all together. He thought about the generations of men who had gone before him, who had faced the same challenges, who had weathered the same storms. He thought about the sea, the way it could be both nurturing and cruel, the way it could give and take with equal force. And in that moment, he realized that his life, his work, was not just about providing for his family. It was about preserving the delicate balance between man and nature, about living in harmony with the world around him. The fisherman spent the rest of the day in quiet reflection, his thoughts shifting between the past, the present, and the future. He thought about his children, about the life he wanted to give them, and about the lessons he hoped they would learn. He thought about the future of the village, about the challenges they would face as the world around them continued to change. And he thought about the sea and the ways in which it had shaped him, had taught him the value of patience, resilience, and respect. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the fjord, the fisherman finally stood up from his work and turned to head home. He was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from hard work and meaningful reflection. As he walked toward his cottage, his mind was at peace, and he felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the life he had, for the family he had built, and for the lessons the sea had taught him. He entered the cottage where his wife and children were, gathered around the hearth, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the fire. They welcomed him home with smiles and laughter, and for a moment the fisherman allowed himself to let go of his worries, to bask in the warmth of their love and the comfort of their presence. The day had been one of reflection, but now, as the evening settled in, it was time for rest, for replenishing the spirit and the body, for preparing for the days ahead. The sea would always be there, with its challenges and its rewards, but for now, the fisherman was content. He had faced the storm, had endured the test, and had come out stronger for it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, but for tonight, he was home. The day had been calm, a rare and precious respite after the violent storm that had tested the limits of the fisherman's endurance. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the fjord in hues of orange and pink, the fisherman felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had spent the morning tending to his nets, repairing the damage caused by the storm's fury, and checking his gear to ensure that everything was in working order. The village had returned to its usual rhythm, with the fishermen preparing their boats for the next day's work, and the women tending to their homes and gardens. The children played in the narrow streets, their laughter a bright sound in the otherwise peaceful village. The fisherman had taken comfort in the simplicity of the day, in the small moments of quiet that had allowed him to reflect on the storm's lessons. Yet, as he stood on the edge of the water, gazing out at the horizon, something deep within him told him that this peace would not last. The sky, which had been clear and bright, was beginning to change, dark clouds gathering on the distant horizon. The wind, which had been gentle, began to stir, carrying with it the promise of something more ominous. The fisherman knew the signs. He had spent his entire life on these waters, and he could read them like a book. The storm was not over. It was returning, more powerful than before. With a deep sigh, the fisherman turned back toward the village, his mind already racing through the preparations that would be needed. The villagers had faced many storms in the past, but the fury of nature was unpredictable, and no one could ever be fully prepared for what was to come. As he walked back to his cottage, he found his wife already waiting for him, her face a mixture of concern and determination. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The fisherman nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "It's coming," he replied simply. "We'll need to prepare." She didn't argue. She never did when it came to the sea. The fisherman had seen the strength in her eyes many times before, and he knew that whatever was coming, they would face it together. They had faced countless storms before, and this one would be no different, though it was clear to him that this time it would test them in ways they had never experienced. As the evening progressed, the clouds grew darker, the wind picking up strength with every passing minute. The fisherman's mind raced, calculating the movements of the storm, trying to predict its path and intensity. He knew that they had little time. He moved quickly, gathering his family and making sure that the house was as secure as it could be. The children, sensing the change in the air, were already huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. The fisherman did his best to reassure them, though he could see the worry in their faces. He had never seen a storm like this, but he was determined that it would not defeat them. "It's just another test," he said, his voice firm. "We've faced worse, and we'll face this one too. Trust in the sea, trust in the land, and trust in each other." His wife nodded, her expression resolute. She had known this life. From the moment they had met, had understood the dangers of the sea, and had chosen to live alongside them, not in fear, but in respect. She helped him with the preparations, securing the doors and windows, making sure that all their belongings were safely stored away. She worked quickly, her hands steady as she moved through the tasks with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times before. As the wind howled outside, they gathered the children close, huddling together in the center of the house, the warmth of their bodies offering a small comfort against the growing cold of the storm. The fisherman tried to reassure them with stories of the sea, of the storms they had survived, and the lessons they had learned. He spoke of the power of the ocean, how it could both give and take, but how it was always there, a constant presence in their lives. "The storm is powerful," he said softly, "but we are stronger." Outside, the storm began to rage, the wind screaming as it whipped through the trees, and the waves crashed violently against the shore. The fisherman could hear the sound of the boat's hull, groaning under the pressure of the storm's fury, and he knew that he would need to act soon. But for now, there was nothing they could do but wait. The hours stretched on, the storm intensifying with each passing minute. The village was plunged into darkness as the sky darkened, and the wind tore the last remnants of light from the world. Inside, the fisherman and his family clung to each other, their breaths slow and steady as they waited for the worst of it to pass. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. The storm raged outside, but inside it was as if the world had stopped. The children, tired and scared, eventually fell asleep their small bodies pressed against their parents for warmth and comfort. The fisherman held his wife's hand tightly, his mind still racing, but his body now relaxed in the knowledge that they were safe for the moment. They would endure this, as they had endured all the storms that had come before. As the night wore on, the storm began to lose its strength, the wind dying down and the waves becoming less violent. The fisherman remained awake, his senses alert, waiting for the moment when he could venture out once again to check on his boat. The night was long, but eventually the storm passed. The morning light broke through the remnants of the storm clouds, casting a cold, clear light across the village. The fisherman stood at the door of his cottage, looking out at the calm waters of the fjord, the remnants of the storm still evident in the broken branches and scattered debris that littered the ground. He could see the damage to his boat, the waves having torn at its hull, but it was still intact. It had survived, as had he, as had his family. The fisherman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the storm lift from his shoulders. He had weathered it. They had weathered it. And in the quiet aftermath, he realized something profound. The storm had not broken them, but had only made them stronger. The sea had shown its power once again, but it had also reminded them of their own resilience. They were not defeated, not by the storm, nor by anything else that life might throw their way. Together, they were unstoppable. The morning after the storm had passed was filled with a heavy silence that hung over the village like the weight of a memory. The usual sounds of daily life, children's laughter, the crackling of hearth fires, and the hum of life's rhythm seemed distant and muted, replaced instead by a stillness that only a violent storm could bring. The fisherman stood at the edge of the fjord, watching the water with a mixture of reverence and unease, as if it were an old friend whose face had momentarily turned hostile. The waves had calmed, but the sea had not forgotten. It had retreated, yes, but it had left behind the marks of its anger. The boat's hull, now patched and mended, still bore the scars of its fierce grasp, and the once familiar shoreline had been rearranged by the storm's fury. Yet, even as the fisherman stood there, feeling the salt-laced breeze whip across his face, he could not help but feel the pull of the ocean, the call that had always been there, deep within him. It was not just the storm that had passed. It was the quiet aftermath of the sea's dominance that still echoed in his bones. The sea had tested him, but it had also shown him its immense power, its vast, unyielding depth that stretched beyond the horizon. He could hear the waves softly lapping against the shore, their rhythm soothing, almost hypnotic, as if calling to him, inviting him back into the water's embrace. There was something in the air, something in the silence that followed the storm, that stirred something deep within the fisherman's soul. He felt the desire to return to the water, to be swept back into the depths where he belonged, where he could feel the rhythm of the waves beneath his feet and the steady pulse of the ocean in his veins. It was a familiar yearning, one that he had felt countless times before, but today it was stronger, more urgent. As he stood there, his feet planted firmly on the rocky shore, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him, he remembered the first time he had set out to sea as a young boy. He had been so full of wonder and excitement, his heart racing at the thought of what lay beyond the safety of the shore. The world had seemed vast, full of possibilities, and the sea had felt like an infinite mystery, a place where anything could happen, a place where one could discover new worlds. Now, all these years later, as a seasoned fisherman with a life full of both joy and hardship, he understood the sea better, but it had never stopped calling to him. It was a pull that ran deeper than his bones, deeper than anything he could explain. He glanced back toward his cottage, where his family had already begun the day's work. His wife was inside, preparing the meal, while the children played near. The garden, unaware of the tension that had taken hold of their father's heart. He knew they needed him, that he could not stay away from them for long, but the pull of the ocean was undeniable. The water was calling him, and he felt it in the very marrow of his bones, a soundless summons that tugged at his spirit. "I'll go out again," he thought to himself, his mind already racing ahead to the next venture, the next time he would set sail into the unknown. He felt a sense of both dread and excitement stirring within him, a recognition that his bond with the sea was not just one of survival, but one of devotion. The sea was both a mother and a lover to him, nurturing, dangerous, beautiful, and unforgiving. He had learned over the years that to live alongside the ocean was to be in a constant state of balance, to understand that with every moment of peace there was the potential for chaos, that with every calm day a storm might follow. Yet, despite the dangers, there was something intoxicating about the sea, something that made it impossible for him to stay away. With a deep breath, the fisherman turned away from the shore and made his way back to his boat. The morning light gleamed off the water, making it look almost inviting, like a lover waiting for him. The boat was where it had been left, anchored just off the shore, its sturdy oak frame weathered but strong. It had been repaired, and the nets had been mended, each knot tied with care. The fisherman was ready. There was no hesitation in his movements now. He understood the risks, knew the dangers the sea could bring, but those were the very things that drew him back, time and again. As he pushed the boat into the water and climbed aboard, he glanced once more at the village in the distance. Familiar smoke curling from the chimneys, the steady rhythm of life carrying on without him. It all seemed so far away now. The sea was calling to him, and this time he would not ignore it. The water felt cool against the hull as he paddled out, the boat cutting through the smooth surface, leaving a ripple in its wake. The wind had died down, and the waters were calm, but the fisherman knew better than to let the calm fool him. The ocean was always changing, always shifting beneath his feet, and he would need to stay alert, to read the water and the sky as they spoke to him. With each stroke of the oar, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had returned to his natural element, to the place where he was both a part of the world and separate from it. The world of the village, with its chores and expectations, seemed so distant now, so removed from the simple, timeless task of being one with the sea. He could hear the soft rush of the water as the boat moved forward, the sound of nature at its most serene, its most primal. The call of the depths was in the water, in the waves that beckoned him to go further, deeper, beyond the reach of land. There was a timelessness to the sea that reminded him of his place in the world, reminded him that he was a small part of something much larger, something ancient and unyielding. And as the boat drifted further from the shore, the fisherman allowed himself to relax into the rhythm of the water, his thoughts quieting, his body and soul aligning with the pulse of the ocean. The sea had accepted him, had always accepted him, and in return, he gave it everything he had, his respect, his labor, his loyalty. As the boat glided across the calm waters, the fisherman could feel the weight of the ocean's power beneath him, a power that was both humbling and exhilarating. It was the call of the depths, a call he had answered many times before and would continue to answer for as long as he lived. The sea was home. The sea was life. And as long as it called to him, he would always return. The day had begun like so many others, with the slow, steady rhythm of life in the village unfolding under the gray light of dawn. But today felt different to the fisherman, as if the very air itself was thick with expectation. The water that had once felt like an endless companion now seemed to call to him with an unfamiliar intensity, almost as if it were beckoning him deeper, urging him to go further than he had ever ventured before. He stood by his boat, staring out at the fjord, its surface shimmering faintly in the early morning light, a perfect mirror of the sky above. The gentle rocking of the boat, the soft creaking of its oak frame beneath his hands, felt comforting, familiar, yet there was an undercurrent of something new, something pulling him forward into the unknown. His mind wandered back to the stories told by the elders when he was young, tales of creatures that lurked beneath the waters, of treasures hidden deep within the sea's embrace, of mysteries that had not been solved for generations. The old tales spoke of great beasts, of leviathans whose shadows could be seen in the depths, and of sailors who had never returned, lost to the endless blue. As a boy, he had been enthralled by these stories, his imagination ignited by the promise of adventure that lay beneath the surface. But as a man of the sea, the fisherman had learned to temper that fascination with caution. The ocean was not a place for idle curiosity. It was a place of harsh truths and dangerous beauty. Yet today, standing there on the shore, he felt the stirrings of that old thrill once again. The sea had always been a constant in his life, providing sustenance, danger, and solace in equal measure. But now it felt as though it was offering something more, something he couldn't yet understand. The call was stronger, more urgent. He pushed the unsettling thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. His nets were waiting, the ropes neatly coiled and ready to be cast, the boat steady and reliable beneath his feet. The usual preparations were done, but something lingered in the back of his mind, a quiet hum of anticipation that he could not shake. It was not the sea's rhythm that had changed. It was something inside him. With a deep breath, the fisherman turned and climbed into his boat, his movements practiced and smooth. He grasped the oars firmly and began to row, the boat gliding effortlessly across the calm waters of the fjord. The world around him seemed suspended in time, the only sounds the rhythmic splash of the oars and the distant calls of gulls. As he rowed further from shore, the village slowly faded from view, the sounds of daily life becoming muffled by the vast expanse of water. There was a silence now, a profound solitude that seemed to stretch out forever, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water against the hull of his boat. His mind began to clear, the weight of the world back on land easing away as the sea embraced him. There was something about the solitude of the fjord, the isolation it offered, that allowed him to connect with the world in a way he could not. On land, here on the water, there were no distractions, no demands, just the fisherman and the sea. And yet today, that quiet serenity was tinged with something else. He felt a strange, unshakable certainty that something awaited him beyond. The horizon, something hidden beneath the shimmering surface, just out of reach. As he rowed deeper into the fjord, the water began to change. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the color, a deepening of the blue as he ventured further. The clarity of the water seemed to intensify, and the light seemed to refract differently, casting strange shadows beneath the surface. The fisherman glanced down into the water, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw something moving just below the surface, something large, dark, and shifting in the depths. His heart skipped a beat, but when he peered closer, there was nothing. The water was as still and clear as before, as if mocking his imagination. He shook his head, muttering a quiet curse under his breath. It was just the sea playing tricks on him. That was all. Still, the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond his sight, lingered in his chest, a weight that grew heavier the further he rowed. His eyes scanned the horizon, the looming cliffs on either side of the fjord casting long shadows as the sun climbed higher. The air felt thick, almost electric, and the soft breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed. The ocean's rhythm seemed different today, more insistent, more alive. He had been out on the water countless times before, but today was different, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him, something that had. Been there all along, just beneath the surface. As he neared a small inlet, the water grew darker, the shadows from the cliffs stretching over the boat like a blanket. The fisherman's grip tightened on the oars as he steered his boat toward the narrow opening, the water becoming choppy and unsettled as he entered. The wind had picked up too, blowing harder now, as if urging him on, pushing him deeper into the fjord. The boat creaked beneath him, and he could feel the slight tug of the current as it tried to pull him further in. A sense of unease crept into his chest, but his curiosity was stronger. He couldn't explain it, but he felt compelled to continue. The inlet was small, and as he moved further in, the walls of the fjord rose higher on either side, closing in around him like the jaws of some great beast. The water was now a deep, rich blue, almost black, and the air felt thick with the weight of history. The fisherman slowed the boat, his eyes scanning the water carefully. The surface was smooth now, unnaturally so, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone here, that something was watching him from beneath the depths, waiting for him to make the first move. And then, with a sudden rush of cold air and the unmistakable scent of salt, it came a flash of silver, a ripple in the water just beneath the surface. The fisherman's heart raced, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. Something large, something powerful, was moving beneath him, its presence undeniable. He leaned forward, trying to see through the dark water, but it was too deep. The surface was still again, like a mirror, but the feeling remained, heavy and suffocating, as if the very ocean was holding its breath along with him. As the fisherman sat frozen in his boat, the eerie stillness of the water seemed to stretch on for eternity. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat reverberating through his body as he slowly scanned the surface of the fjord. The ripples he had seen moments ago had vanished without a trace, leaving the water as calm and impenetrable as it had been before. Yet something had changed. The air felt heavier now, saturated with an unspoken tension that clung to him, suffocating his thoughts. It was as though the fjord itself had become a living, breathing entity, one that watched him silently from the shadows beneath. He had always known that the sea held its secrets ancient, unyielding secrets, but today it seemed that those secrets had come alive, reaching out to him in ways he couldn't understand. His grip on the oars tightened, knuckles white against the wood, and for a moment he wondered whether he should turn back, return to the safety of the shore and the life he had known for so long. But something deep within him resisted the urge. A curiosity, no, a calling had taken root inside him, and it was impossible to ignore. The quiet, the stillness, the sense of something greater beneath it all. It was as though the sea had pulled him in, invited him into its depths, and now it would not let him go. Slowly, almost reverently, he dipped the oars back into the water and began to row again. The boat glided forward, cutting through the glassy surface with ease. His eyes remained fixed on the water, searching for any sign, any movement that would betray the presence of whatever it was that lurked beneath. For a long while, the only sound was the rhythmic splash of the oars, the creaking of the boat, and the occasional distant cry of a seabird. It was a peaceful sound, a sound that should have brought him comfort, but today it only heightened the sense of unease that clung to him. He moved deeper into the fjord, the narrowing passageways on either side of him causing the water to shift with a subtle current. The cliffs that rose high above seemed to close in around him, their shadows falling over the boat and darkening the water. The air was thick now, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the wind had died down to nothing, leaving the fjord in an oppressive silence. And then, just as he was beginning to think that perhaps it had all been a trick of his imagination, A soft ripple broke the surface of the water once more. The fisherman's heart skipped a beat, and he froze, his breath catching in his throat. This time, it was different. The ripple was deliberate, a slow, almost purposeful movement. It spread out in concentric circles, the water shimmering in, the early morning light as it moved. The fisherman leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, trying to pierce the darkness beneath. The water was so clear here, but there was a depth to it, a darkness that swallowed everything below. He could see nothing, no sign of what caused the disturbance, but the feeling, that overwhelming sense of being watched, only grew stronger. The ripple widened, and then, without warning, something large and dark surged beneath the surface, rising up from the depths with terrifying speed. The fisherman's heart stopped, his breath catching in his chest. For a moment, time seemed to stretch and bend, as though the very world was holding its breath. The water churned violently, sending waves crashing into the sides of the boat, causing it to rock dangerously. He scrambled for the oars, his hands shaking with fear, but before he could regain control, the boat was suddenly pulled sideways, rocked by an unseen force beneath the water. It was as though something enormous, something ancient, was reaching up from the depths, testing him, challenging him. The fisherman's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. He had heard the old tales, the legends passed down, from generation to generation, stories of creatures that lived in the depths of the fjord, unseen and untouched by man. But he had always dismissed them as just that, stories. Now, in the face of this overwhelming force, he couldn't deny it any longer. Whatever it was real, and it was watching him. He fought to steady the boat, to keep it from capsizing, as the water continued to churn around him. His heart was racing, each beat pounding in his ears, but the sense of something ancient, something unfathomable, pressing in on him was too much. His gaze darted back and forth, desperate for any sign, any clue that could explain what was happening. He felt a tremor in the water beneath him, a deep, resonating vibration that seemed to come from the very earth itself. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the water stilled. The boat rocked gently, as though nothing had happened at all. The ripple had disappeared. The water was calm again, the surface smooth and glassy. The fisherman sat there, breathless, his body trembling with adrenaline and fear. The moment had passed, but the unease that lingered in his chest only deepened. He couldn't explain what had just happened, nor could he shake the feeling that he had only glimpsed a small fraction of the mystery that lay beneath the surface. There was something down there, something waiting, and it wasn't finished with him yet. Slowly, cautiously, he began to row again, his eyes scanning the water for any signs of movement. But the fjord had returned to its peaceful, deceptive calm. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth, and the only sound was the soft splash of the oars against the water. The village was far behind him now, the shoreline a distant memory, and all that surrounded him was the vast, uncharted expanse of the fjord. As he rowed deeper into the heart of the fjord, the sense of unease remained, gnawing at him from the inside. Something ancient, something powerful was down there, and he had been drawn into its world. The fisherman knew that he had to continue, to seek out whatever lay beneath, but with each stroke of the oars, a gnawing fear clawed at him, a fear that he might never leave the fjord again, that he might become yet another lost soul, swallowed by the depths, swallowed by the sea. The days began to blend together for the fisherman as he ventured deeper into the fjord, the stillness of the water now a constant companion. He had grown accustomed to the eerie silence that surrounded him, but the sense of unease that had settled in his chest never fully dissipated. Each time he set out in the boat, rowing further away from the familiar shores, He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in, as though the fjord itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. His heart still raced when the slightest ripple disturbed the calm surface of the water, but he had learned to ignore it, telling himself that it was only the wind or the shifting currents. Yet, a part of him knew that something far greater, something far more ancient, lurked beneath. The water no longer felt like a place of solace. It had become a realm of mystery and menace, a world where the rules of nature no longer seemed to apply. As he rowed that morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting a faint, golden light over the water, the fisherman thought about the strange events that had unfolded in the days since he first noticed the ripples. He had returned to the same spot each day, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was that had stirred the depths. But each time he found nothing. The water had remained calm, placid even, as though mocking his curiosity. Still, there was no denying that the sense of something watching him, something waiting just beneath the surface, had grown stronger. It was as though the fjord had eyes, and they were always upon him. The shadows of the cliffs loomed over him. As he rowed, the towering stone walls rising like sentinels on either side, their jagged edges softened by the morning mist that hung in the air. He could hear the faint call of seabirds, their cries echoing through the stillness, but even their sounds seemed muted, as if the very fjord absorbed their noise, swallowed it whole. The boat rocked gently as he glided through the water, the rhythmic splash of the oars almost hypnotic, lulling him into a trance-like state. But just as he began to lose himself in the monotony, a sudden shiver ran down his spine. The water, once smooth as glass, began to ripple once more. But this time it was different. It wasn't the soft, gentle ripple that came from the wind or the current. It was more deliberate, almost purposeful. The fisherman's hand instinctively gripped the oars tighter, his knuckles turning white, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes scanned the surface of the water, searching for any sign of what caused the disturbance. For a long moment, there was nothing, only the endless expanse of the fjord stretching out before him. Then, as though in response to his silent plea, the water stirred again. This time, a large shape emerged, dark and looming beneath the surface, just out of reach of his vision. It was massive, larger than anything he had ever seen, and its movements were fluid, as though it was one with the water, an extension of the fjord itself. The fisherman's breath caught in his throat, and his pulse quickened as the shape drew closer, rising from the depths like an ancient slumbering titan. The ripples grew larger, more pronounced, as the creature whatever. It was moved through the water with deliberate grace. He could feel the pull of the deep, a magnetic force that seemed to draw him toward it, and he found himself unable to look away, unable to tear his eyes from the undulating water. There was something mesmerizing about the way the creature moved, something hypnotic in its slow, rhythmic rise and fall. But with the fascination came a growing sense of dread, a primal fear that stirred within him like a forgotten memory. What was it? What was lurking just beneath the surface, just out of reach? The fisherman's hand trembled as he slowly reached for the harpoon that lay at his feet, his fingers brushing against the smooth wood of the shaft. It felt strangely heavy in his grasp, as though it had become a weight he could no longer bear. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to leave the fjord behind and never look back. But something deeper, something that went beyond reason or logic, held him in place. The shape beneath the water moved closer, and for a fleeting moment, the fisherman thought he saw a glint of something in the water, a flash of light-like eyes, cold and unblinking, staring directly at him from the depths. A shudder passed through him, and his breath quickened. His gaze darted to the surface, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw the creature's silhouette, its massive body stretching across the water, its dark form impossible to ignore. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, vanished into the depths from which it had come. The water stilled once more, and the fisherman was left in the silence, the ripples fading away as if they had never existed at all. His heart still raced, his hands still shook as he gripped the oars, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Had it been real? Or was it some trick of his mind, a product of too many sleepless nights spent on the water? But deep down, he knew. The answer, it had been real. There was something beneath the fjord, something ancient and powerful, and it had just revealed itself to him. The fisherman didn't know what it was, nor did he understand why it had shown itself to him. But one thing was certain. It had marked him. The unspoken warning, the subtle movement in the water, had made it clear he was no longer just a visitor to this fjord. He was part of it now, bound to it in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The creature beneath the surface had seen him, and it would not forget, and neither would he. As the boat drifted, he turned his gaze back toward the shore, his mind racing with questions and fears that he couldn't shake. What had he just witnessed? What was the fjord hiding? And what price? Would he have to pay for uncovering its secrets? The answers eluded him, just as the creature had vanished beneath the water. All that remained was the silence, the stillness, and the unshakable sense that he had only scratched the surface of something far larger than he could ever imagine. As he rowed back toward the shore, the weight of the unknown pressed down on him, heavier than ever before. The echoes of the deep still rang in his ears, a reminder that the fjord was not just a place of peace and solitude. It was a place of secrets that had been waiting for him, secrets that had chosen him to bear witness to their power. The fisherman didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He could never turn back now. The fjord had called to him, and he had answered. And as he made his way toward the shore, he realized that his life would never be the same again. The deep, dark mysteries of the fjord had taken root inside him, and there was no escaping the pull of the water. The air grew colder as the fisherman ventured farther into the fjord, the weight of the morning's events still heavy in his chest. The strange creature's fleeting appearance haunted his thoughts, its dark shape still vivid in his mind, etched into the fabric of his consciousness, like a ghost that refused to leave. The water beneath his boat now felt different, as though it was watching him, listening to him, holding its breath. Each ripple that disturbed the otherwise still surface seemed like a warning, an invitation to uncover what lay hidden, or perhaps a reminder that some mysteries were better left unsolved. His oars cut through the water with a rhythmic cadence, but every stroke felt slower than the last, as though the fjord itself was resisting his movement, reluctant to let him venture deeper into its heart. The landscape around him had grown, more foreboding. The towering cliffs, once majestic, now loomed above him like silent, watchful guardians, their jagged peaks shrouded in a mist that clung to their edges like a veil. The pine trees, which had once seemed welcoming, now seemed to whisper to each other, their rustling branches, a language the fisherman couldn't understand, a language he felt he was no longer meant to be part of. As he rowed, he felt the weight of their gaze on him, the trees watching him as he passed, their ancient roots buried deep in the earth, their trunks twisted by time and storm. He was no longer just a man in a moat. He was an intruder in a realm far older than he had ever imagined. The morning fog, once a familiar friend that had helped him navigate the fjord, now felt like a shroud closing in around him. He could feel his pulse quicken, a rising sense of unease bubbling in his chest, but he pressed on, determined to find the answers that had eluded him for so long. The creature's appearance had opened a door, and now he was caught between two worlds, one of the living and one of the ancient, the unknown. He couldn't turn back now, not when he had come so far, not when the secrets of the fjord had begun to reveal themselves. And yet, With every stroke of his oars, the distance between him and the shore grew greater, and the sense of isolation deepened. The further he went, the more he felt the fjord's presence wrapping around him, enveloping him in its cold, silent embrace. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the fjord, tugging at his cloak and ruffling the surface of the water. It was a strange wind, one that felt different from the usual breeze that accompanied his daily excursions. It had a weight to it, a pull that seemed to draw the very air from his lungs. He could hear it, the faintest whisper, a sound just beyond the reach of his understanding, as if the wind itself was speaking to him. He paused, gripping the oars tightly, and listened. The sound was faint, like the rustling of leaves, but there was a rhythm to it, a pattern. The words were indistinct, but they were there, murmuring just beneath the roar of the wind. The fisherman's heart skipped a beat. Was it the wind? Or was it something else? Something alive? He strained his ears, but the words remained elusive, slipping away like the fading echoes of a dream. The silence that followed felt deafening, and for a long moment he sat in the boat, staring at the misty expanse before him, the fog now thicker than before. The eerie quiet was broken by the sound of his breath, quick and shallow, his chest rising and falling with the weight of his thoughts. It was as though the fjord itself had exhaled, the unseen force pushing him forward. His thoughts drifted to the creature, the one that had surfaced from the depths. What was it? What was it waiting for? The questions lingered, unanswered, swirling like the fog around him. The wind shifted again, stronger now, tugging at the boat as if trying to push it into the unknown. The fisherman turned his gaze to the water. He could see it now, the shadows beneath the surface, moving just out of reach, shifting with the current. The water rippled as if something was stirring beneath, something large, something powerful. The creature was there, just beyond his sight, its presence undeniable. The air grew thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The whispering wind grew louder, as though the fjord itself was urging him to act, to follow, to dive deeper into the mystery. Without thinking, the fisherman grabbed the harpoon lying at his feet and held it tightly in his hands. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the weapon, his gaze fixed on the water. The whispers grew louder, but they were still indecipherable. Like a song he could almost understand, but not quite. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had come this far, and now he had no choice but to continue. The water shifted again, and the fisherman felt the boat lurch as something massive brushed against the underside, sending a ripple through the stillness. He tightened his grip on the oars, pushing himself forward, determined to reach the heart of the fjord, where the answers waited. The fog began to clear, and in its place, the water seemed to glow, as if the very surface was alive with energy. The air around him crackled with an unseen force, and the wind, no longer a whisper, howled around him, urging him onward. He could hear it now, the wind's voice clear and unmistakable, echoing in his mind. "Come," it said, "come deeper." The fisherman didn't hesitate. With a final, forceful stroke of the oars, he propelled the boat forward, moving toward the unknown, toward the heart of the fjord. He could feel the pull of the water now, the currents beneath him swirling with purpose, as though they were guiding him. The shadows in the water grew darker, more pronounced, and for the first time, the fisherman felt as though he was not alone. He had crossed the threshold, stepping into a world beyond his understanding. The wind howled again, louder now, as though the fjord itself was speaking to him, beckoning him forward. And so he rowed, the sound of the oars cutting through the water in perfect rhythm with the whispers in the wind, the world around him growing darker and more mysterious with each passing moment. The answers, he knew, were just ahead. All he had to do was reach out and take them. The fog thickened once more, enveloping the fisherman in its suffocating embrace, as if the very air itself had conspired to hide the fjord's deepest secrets from him. His oars dipped into the cold water with a rhythmic precision each stroke, now carrying an uncertain weight. The shadows beneath the water had grown darker, their movements more pronounced, as though they were watching him, waiting for him to venture deeper into the heart of the fjord. Every part of him was on edge. The mysterious whispers in the wind had not ceased, but had grown more urgent, more insistent, like a beckoning call he could not resist. His grip tightened on the oars, the muscles in his arms aching as he rowed forward, the boat cutting through the water with barely a sound, as if it too feared what lay beneath the surface. The whispering wind seemed to wrap around him, its voice now a constant hum in his ears, a steady pulse that matched the beating of his heart. "Come closer," it urged, a command rather than a request, and in the depths of his mind, the fisherman felt an overwhelming compulsion to obey. He didn't know why, but something within him recognized the call. Something deep inside him that had long been buried had begun to stir, to awaken. He had never been afraid of the sea, never feared its unpredictable nature, its storms or its calms. But now, in this eerie stillness, the fjord had become something different, a place of ancient power, of forces beyond his comprehension. He could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was imagined. The creature he had glimpsed before, was it real, or had it been a trick of the mind? The shadows moving beneath the water, they were no longer just shadows. They had become something more, something tangible. And as the boat drifted deeper into the heart of the fjord, the fisherman felt a shiver crawl up his spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. It wasn't just the wind, nor the water that seemed to vibrate with energy. It was the very land itself, the cliffs towering above him, the ancient pines lining the shore, all seemed to hum with a low, resonating frequency, as though they, too, were part of the grand mystery. He could see them now, the dark shapes beneath the surface, closer than before, their outlines more defined. They were massive, undulating with the gentle movement of the water, gliding in and out of sight, vanishing into the depths, and reappearing in the blink of an eye. The fisherman couldn't tear his gaze away from them. His breath caught in his throat as the realization dawned on him. These weren't just fish or sea creatures of the fjord. No, they were something else entirely, something older. The wind, which had been a whisper, now roared with urgency, howling through the trees, rattling the branches, urging him onward, deeper into the unknown. His pulse quickened, his heart hammering in his chest, as the boat continued its slow drift toward the center of the fjord. The very water around him seemed to come alive, swirling and shifting, as though the fjord itself was breathing, pulling him deeper into its mysterious depths. He had heard the stories of corse tailies passed down through the generations, of sailors lost to the fjord, of strange creatures lurking in the dark waters, of the ancient spirits that were said to protect the fjord. But he had always dismissed them, thinking them nothing more than superstition, the stuff of myths and old wives' tales. Now, as he moved further into the fjord, he could feel it, the presence of something watching him, something ancient and powerful. The shadows beneath the water were no longer mere shapes. They were living, moving entities, their eyes, if they had eyes, locked onto him. And in that moment, he knew. He was not alone in this fjord. He never had been. With every stroke of the oars, he moved closer to the heart of the mystery. The air had grown colder still, and the fog had thickened until it was nearly impossible to see anything beyond the tip of the boat. But the fisherman knew that the answers lay ahead, just beyond. The veil, in the depths of the fjord. The ancient whispers had become a constant presence in his mind, a voice he could no longer ignore. "Come," it said. "Come and see." The boat rocked gently as he rowed, the sound of the oars dipping into the water becoming louder, more pronounced, as though the fjord itself was urging him forward. He could hear it now, a soft hum emanating from the depths, rising and falling with the rhythm of the waves, as if the very water was alive, singing a song that had been lost to time. The boat crept closer to the center of the fjord, the water, growing darker with each passing moment. The shadows beneath the surface had coalesced into something more defined, something that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The fisherman's heart raced as he reached for the harpoon lying beside him. He didn't know why, but he felt as though he had to be prepared, as though something might emerge from the depths at any moment, something that demanded to be confronted. The wind howled once more, louder than before, and the fisherman, with a final determined stroke of his oars, pushed the boat further into the heart of the fjord. And there, in the vastness of the water, he saw it. A massive shape, its eyes glowing faintly beneath the surface, its body undulating with the rhythm of the water. The creature had been waiting for him, just as the whispers had promised. And now, at last, they would meet. The fisherman felt his breath catch in his throat, his heart pounding as the boat moved closer to the creature, the mist swirling around them like an ancient cloak. The silence was deafening now, and in that silence, the fisherman felt something shift within him, a connection to the creature, to the water, to the very soul of the fjord itself. And then, with a single final pull of his oars, he entered the heart of the mystery, and the creature, whatever it was, emerged from the depths to meet him, its presence vast, ancient, and beyond anything he had ever imagined. The fog enveloped them both, and for the first time in his life, the fisherman understood. He was no longer just a man in a boat. He was part of the fjord now, part of the very heartbeat of the land and water, and in that moment, everything changed. The answers had been revealed, but what lay beyond them was something that only the ancient spirits of the fjord could know. Oh. The morning sun was barely a whisper against the thick, lingering mist that enveloped the fjord, casting the landscape in muted shades of gray. The fisherman, still reeling from his encounter in the depths of the fjord, sat motionless in his boat, his hands gripped tightly around the oars, though he no longer moved them. His gaze was fixed on the water below, his eyes tracing the faint ripples that told a tale of things far beyond his understanding. The creature, what had it been? It was no longer merely an ethereal shadow, but a presence that had shaped the very core of the fjord, something that was a part of it, and yet far more ancient, far more enigmatic. There was no clear form, no definition to its being, just an overwhelming sense of power that seeped into the very fabric of the air. The fisherman's mind, accustomed to the logic of tides and fish, now struggled to process the otherworldly encounter, to put into words the sense of connection he had felt with the creature, the depths, and the fjord itself. He couldn't explain it, nor did he try. His understanding was irrelevant in the face of something so ancient and vast. Yet there was a part of him that knew. It had always been there, beneath the surface, just waiting to be recognized. The stories, the myths, the whispers of ancient mariners, they had all been more than just tales. They were warnings, truths cloaked in the illusion of fiction. But now, with the fog thick around him and the water as still as the very air, the fishermen realized that the truths they had spoken of were not to be ignored, nor easily understood. The reality of the fjord, the creatures within it, the spirits that lingered beyond the veil, it was a truth older than mankind, one that mankind had long tried to forget. In the silence, the hum of the water around him seemed to speak. The fisherman closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to rid himself of the fog in his mind, the fog that clung to him, both physical and mental. It was then that he heard it faint, but unmistakable. A sound a low rumble that vibrated in his chest, followed by a sudden change in the air. It was as if the fjord had come alive with its own breath. His pulse quickened. He had heard stories of the fjord's heartbeat, of the time when it would call upon its chosen to return to the depths. He thought he had understood those stories, thought he had been prepared. But this was no simple tale. This was the truth, raw and unfathomable, reaching into his very being. The water began to stir, faint ripples spreading out from an unknown source, a tremor beneath the surface. A slow realization crept upon him. He wasn't alone. No longer was he merely a fisherman out at sea, casting his nets and hoping for a good catch. No, now he was part of the ancient rhythm of the fjord, part of its living history. The boat rocked slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though responding to the pull of something much greater than the tides themselves. The fisherman, still unsure of what had awakened inside him, felt a pull toward the center of the fjord, a magnetism that could not be explained, only felt. He had crossed into something beyond the physical world, beyond his simple understanding of fish and nets. He wasn't simply here to fish. He was here to understand, to be part of something vast and incomprehensible. His body, though still, seemed to hum with the ancient energy that pulsed through the water. It was in the air, in the mist, in the very rocks that rose out of the sea. He was being guided, drawn into the heart of something he could not yet fathom. The ripples in the water grew larger, the hum in the air stronger. And then, without warning, the creature from before, the one that had revealed itself in glimpses, in shadows, rose again from the depths. This time, it was no longer a shadow in the water, but a presence that filled the very space around him. It was massive, its form shifting in the water, neither fish nor beast, neither man nor spirit. It was something beyond all of that. And as it loomed before him, the fisherman understood, in the deepest parts of his being, that it was neither foe nor friend. It was a force, an ancient force of the fjord, a manifestation of the land and the water, a being as old as the hills and as deep as the ocean. The air around him thickened, and he could feel the weight of centuries bearing down on him. The very space seemed to stretch, as though time itself was warping, bending around the presence of the creature. His mind raced with thoughts of escape, but there was nowhere to run, no safe place beyond the reach of the fjord. The creature, however, did not approach him with malice. It was simply there, watching, waiting, as if assessing him, considering his place in this vast, unending cycle. He had come to the fjord with his own purpose, his own desires, but now it seemed that the purpose had shifted. He was not merely a fisherman. He was a part of something far greater, something that stretched back to the beginning of time. The creature moved once more, this time rising slightly from the water, its vast form glowing faintly beneath the mist. The fisherman's breath caught in his throat as the creature seemed to stare at him, its immense, unknowable eyes meeting his own. The connection was instant, overwhelming. It was as though he could feel the creature's ancient wisdom pouring into him, knowledge beyond his years, beyond his life, beyond the generations of men who had lived and died here. He felt the heartbeat of the fjord reverberate through his chest, the pulse of the land and the sea, of life and death, of beginnings and endings. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature disappeared beneath the water once more, leaving the fisherman alone with the vast emptiness. The boat rocked gently, as if nothing had ever happened. But the fisherman knew. He had touched something that no man had ever touched before. He had glimpsed the truth, and in that glimpse, everything had changed. He would never be the same. Again, the fog lifted, the wind shifted, and the fjord returned to its usual calm. But the fisherman knew that the world he had known had ended. Something new had begun. He rowed slowly back to the shore, the weight of his newfound understanding heavy on his chest. He was not simply a fisherman anymore. He was part of the fjord's eternal cycle, and the fjord had shown him the truth. A truth he would carry with him for the rest of his days. A truth that could never be unlearned. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the fjord bathed in the cool, ethereal glow of twilight. The fisherman sat by the edge of the shore, his boat tethered to the rocky pier, his hands resting in his lap, fingers stiff from the day's work. The encounter with the creature still weighed heavily on him, though it had now been several days since the event. The image of the creature, its vast, undulating form rising from the depths, had not left his mind, nor had the feeling of being watched, of being drawn into something far beyond the ordinary bounds of his world. It was as if his very presence here, on this ancient stretch of land, had been the spark to awaken something that had slumbered for ages. The winds blew softly, the waves lapping gently against the rocks, but the quietude of the evening seemed to vibrate with a subtle energy, as though the fjord itself was holding its breath. The fisherman had always thought of the fjord as his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of the tides and the pulse of the water. But now, the water seemed alive in ways he hadn't understood before, as if it held secrets, memories and ancient powers that were far too great for one man to comprehend. In the silence of the evening, the fisherman could feel it, the faint pull in his chest, a yearning that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. It wasn't just the physical pull of the tides, nor was it the lure of the catch. It was something deeper, something older than time itself. It was as if the fjord had become a living entity, a force that called to him, not with words, but with an insistent, unspoken command. He could feel the weight of its gaze upon him, the immense power beneath the water, and it made him uneasy. Yet there was something intoxicating about it too, something that beckoned him closer, urging him to dive into the depths, to discover what lay beneath the surface. The creatures of the fjord, the ancient beings that had inhabited its waters, long before man had set foot on its shores, had seen things that no man should see, things that could break the mind of anyone who dared to look too deeply into the abyss. The fisherman had heard the stories, of course. He had listened to the old men in the village, who spoke in hushed tones of the beings that dwelled beneath the waves. They had told tales of spirits, of gods, of creatures born of the sea's darkest corners, of things that were neither alive nor dead, but something in between. The fisherman had never truly believed in these stories, dismissing them as the ramblings of old men who had seen too many winters. But now, with the encounter so fresh in his mind, he couldn't help but wonder if there was truth to them after all. The creature he had seen, the one that had risen from the depths, was not something he had ever encountered before. It was beyond his understanding, beyond the bounds of what he knew. And yet, in some strange way, he felt connected to it. It wasn't a feeling of fear, though there had been a moment of terror when it first emerged from the water. No, this was something else. It was a feeling of recognition, as though he had known this creature for lifetimes, as though he had always been a part of the same ancient, tangled web. The stars twinkled overhead, but the fisherman paid them no mind. His attention was drawn, instead, to the water in front of him, the place where the creature had disappeared back into the depths. He could hear the faintest of sounds, almost like whispers rising from the water. They were too quiet to decipher, but they were there, like voices carried by the currents, drifting in and out of hearing, just out of reach. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end, as though the very air had shifted around him. There was a stillness in the air, but it was a different kind of stillness, a charged, expectant stillness. He rose slowly to his feet, drawn toward the water as if by an invisible force. His heart beat in his chest like the rhythm of the tides, slow and steady, yet with a sense of urgency. The silence of the evening deepened, and the fisherman felt as though the world around him was holding its breath, waiting. He stepped forward cautiously, his feet sinking into the soft, wet earth at the edge of the shore. The water lapped gently at his boots, but he did not flinch. He was not afraid. He had been afraid once when the creature first appeared, but that fear had faded, replaced by something else: curiosity, perhaps, or a sense of inevitability. Whatever it was, it pulled him closer to the water's edge. He could see the faint ripples on the surface, the way the water seemed to move of its own accord, as though something beneath it was stirring. His heart raced faster now, a sense of anticipation building within him. And then, without warning, the water erupted. The surface broke open like the ripples of a storm, and the creature, vast, dark, and formless, rose again from the depths. The fisherman's breath caught in his throat as he gazed at the thing before him, unable to look away. It was not the same creature he had seen before. This one was even larger, its form more pronounced, its presence more overwhelming. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glistened with an ancient, fathomless knowledge, watching him with a calm, almost indifferent gaze. The fisherman stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to speak. The creature did not approach, nor did it retreat. It simply lingered, floating just beneath the surface, as though waiting for him to understand. The whispers rose again, louder this time, a low murmur carried on the wind, on the water, in his very mind. They spoke of things ancient and forgotten, of powers that had been hidden from mankind for eons. The fisherman could feel the words press against his mind, a weight that both suffocated and enlightened him. He could no longer tell where the creature ended and the fjord began. The line between them had blurred, merged into something inseparable, something that existed on a plane beyond his comprehension. And in that moment, he understood. He was no longer just a fisherman. He was part of the fjord, part of the ancient, timeless cycle that bound the land, the water, and all that lived within it. He was connected to the creature, to the depths, to the ancient power that had awakened within him. His role in the world had changed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the creature watched him, and the fisherman knew, without a doubt, that his life would never be the same. He had seen the truth, the unspoken truths of the fjord, and he would never be able to forget it. Get it. The morning light filtered through the mist that clung to the fjord, casting long spectral shadows over the still water. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and salt, the silence broken only by the occasional cry of a gull or the rhythmic splash of oars cutting through the calm. The fisherman, still shaken from his encounter with the creature, stood at the edge of the shore, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the world he once knew was now irrevocably changed. The water stretched before him, vast and unknowable, a mirror of the sky above, but to him it no longer seemed serene. It was a living thing, alive with ancient power, a force that had risen up and claimed him as its own. He had felt the creature's presence deeply, the weight of its gaze, the pull of its being. He had heard the whispers, the murmurs of forgotten, knowledge that had filtered into his mind, and now he carried that knowledge with him like a burden too great to bear. The creature, whatever it was, had revealed truths to him, truths that had been hidden from humanity for eons. The fjord was not merely a place of fishing and trade, a patch of land where man had lived for centuries. No, it was a gateway, a place where forces beyond comprehension gathered, ancient and powerful, waiting for someone to awaken them. And he, the fisherman, was that someone? He had always thought himself a humble man, content with the simple rhythm of his life. He had never asked for this, never sought the secrets that the water held. But now, They were his, embedded deep in his soul. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on him, threatening to crush him with its immensity. He could no longer look at the fjord the same way. It was no longer just a backdrop to his life, no longer just a place to earn his living. It was a place of power, of ancient forces that had been there long before him, and it had chosen him, as if by fate, to carry its secrets. It was as though the very earth beneath his feet had shifted, and he was left standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the unknown, unable to turn away. The fisherman's mind wandered, unable to focus on anything other than the vastness of the fjord. The surface of the water seemed to ripple as if in response to his thoughts, and the whispers he had once heard in the depths began to stir in his mind once more. This time they were clearer, more urgent, as if the creature was calling out to him, urging him to understand. He could no longer deny the truth. He had been chosen. The fisherman's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of his new reality sank in. He was no longer a man simply surviving on the edge of the world. He was part of something much larger, something ancient and eternal. He had been awakened to the forces that lay beneath the surface of the fjord, and now there was no turning back. He could feel the pull of the water, the call of the creature, a force that demanded his attention, that demanded his understanding. The stillness of the morning seemed to close in around him, and he took a step forward, his boots sinking into the soft earth as he approached the edge of the water. The fjord, once a source of comfort and familiarity, now felt foreign, alien, as if it held the power to consume him. He had felt its depths before, but now they felt like a dark, bottomless void, one that reached out to claim him. Yet there was something magnetic about it, something that drew him in despite the fear. That tightened his chest. He stood at the water's edge for a long moment, the whispers growing louder, their words now more distinct, more pressing. They spoke of ancient beings, of forgotten gods and creatures that dwelled beneath the surface, of forces that had shaped the land and the sea long before man had set foot upon it. The creature that had risen from the depths was only a fragment, a piece of the larger whole, a force that had been sleeping for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And that moment had come. The fisherman's hands trembled as he reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the water. The touch was electric, as though the water itself was alive, responding to his presence. He could feel it, the connection, the bond between him and the fjord, between him and the creature. It was as though the water had claimed him, as though it had woven its threads through his very being, binding him to it in a way he could not comprehend. The knowledge, the power, surged through him, and for a moment he felt as though he could hear the heartbeat of the earth itself, the pulse of the fjord, steady and unyielding. The creature's whispers grew louder, urging him to listen, to understand. The fisherman closed his eyes, allowing the words to flood his mind, the images of ancient times and forgotten gods flashing before him. He saw the rise and fall of empires, the coming and going of generations, all linked by the same thread, all bound to the water, to the creatures of the deep. The power of the fjord, the power of the creatures that dwelled within it, was not just a force of nature. It was a force that shaped the very fabric of existence. It was a force that had been waiting for someone to awaken it, to bring it back into the world of men. And now that someone was him. The fisherman stood in silence, his mind racing, his heart heavy with the weight of the knowledge he now carried. He could feel the pull of the creature, the call of the deep, and he knew that he could no longer ignore it. It was as though his life had led to this moment, as though all the years spent fishing, all the days spent in the solitude of the fjord, had been building to this. He was part of something much larger than himself, something that spanned the ages, something that had shaped the world long before he was born. The realization both terrified and exhilarated him. He was a part of the ancient cycle, a link in the chain that had been forged by the forces of nature. He had been chosen to carry this burden, to bear this knowledge. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, urging him to take action. The creature, the fjord, the forces beneath the surface, everything was waiting for him to understand, and he would, in time. He had no choice. He had been drawn into a world beyond his own, and now he had to embrace it. The fisherman's heart raced, the weight of his new reality settling over him like a heavy cloak. The water before him shimmered, as though alive, and he knew that his life would never be the same. The whispers faded, but their presence lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the power that now resided within him. He was no longer just a fisherman. He was a part of the water, a part of the creature, a part of the ancient forces that had shaped the world. And in the stillness of the morning, as the first rays of light touched the surface of the fjord, he realized that his journey had only just begun. The sky above was a heavy shade of gray, and the wind had picked up with an unsettling chill that cut through the quiet village like a knife, whispering warnings in the trees as though nature itself sensed the shift in the air. The fisherman stood alone by the water's edge, the steady rhythm of the waves crashing against the rocks, offering a strange comfort. Yet his mind was consumed with thoughts of the unfathomable truth he had uncovered. The fjord, once a place of solitude and simplicity, had become a conduit to something far older and far more powerful than he had ever imagined. As the echoes of the creature's whispers still reverberated in his thoughts, he felt the weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him, a responsibility that he could neither escape nor ignore. The realization that the water, the very lifeblood of his existence, held within it the power to shape not just the course of his life, but the fate of many, settled heavily on his shoulders. He could no longer pretend to be just a simple fisherman, casting nets into the deep for his livelihood. He was part of something far grander, a piece of a larger puzzle that spanned across time and space, linking him to ancient powers that lay dormant beneath the surface of the world. The whispers had spoken of cycles, of an age-old balance that had been disrupted, and now he was the keeper of this knowledge, an unwilling heir to a legacy he never sought. His heart raced as he thought back to the moment when the creature had first emerged from the depths, its gaze fixed upon him as though it knew him in ways he could not fully understand. In that fleeting moment, he had felt both awe and terror, a deep connection to the entity, and yet an undeniable sense of helplessness in the face of its power. It had given him a glimpse of the truth, of the forces that lay beneath the surface, of the fjord, forces that had existed long before man had walked the earth. And now he was bound to those forces, irrevocably marked by them. He could no longer live in ignorance, nor could he deny the path that had been laid before him. The weight of his decision pressed upon him as the storm clouds began to gather. On the horizon, there was no turning back. He had been marked chosen, and there was no going back. The path ahead was unclear, but it was his to walk. The fisherman's hands clenched into fists, the calluses on his palms, a reminder of the work he had done for years, of the life he had known. Yet, as he turned away from the water and began the long walk back to his village, he knew that the work ahead of him would not be the same as it had been before. The days of fishing and living quietly in the shadows of the fjord were over. The world had changed, and so had he. The path of destiny had opened before him, and though it was fraught with danger and uncertainty, he would not walk it alone. The creature's whispers still echoed in his ears, urging him to prepare for what was to come. There was a storm on the horizon, and he would need all his strength, all his courage to face it. As the fisherman walked, his thoughts turned inward, grappling with the magnitude of the task ahead. He had no idea what the creature wanted from him or what the future held. All he knew was that the path was set and there was no turning back. The fjord, the creature, the ancient powers beneath the surface, everything had led him here. And now he would answer the call. With each step he took, the weight of his decision settled heavier upon him. But there was also a strange sense of purpose that began to fill the empty spaces inside him. This was his path, the one he was meant to follow. And whatever lay ahead, he would face it head on as a man of the water, a man bound to the ancient forces that had awakened within him. The journey was just beginning, and the fisherman was ready. The world, once so simple and predictable, had become a vast and uncertain place, but he would not falter. Not now, not ever. The whispers continued to stir, and with each passing moment, the path ahead grew clearer. The fisherman, now a man bound to something greater than himself, stepped forward into the unknown. The world was waiting for him to take his place, and he would. As the fisherman made his way toward the village, the weight of the task that lay before him pressed heavily on his mind. The familiar landscape, once comforting and simple, now seemed distant, like a dream slipping through his fingers. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon was no longer just a warning from nature. It was the beginning of something inevitable, a shift that he could no longer ignore. The whispers from the creature still echoed in his ears, growing louder with each passing day, urging him to prepare, to understand, to act. And yet, the fisherman found himself standing at the precipice, unsure of how to move forward, caught between the world he had known and the uncertain future that beckoned him. The village, with its small wooden cottages and smoke rising from chimneys, seemed unchanged, as if it had not yet felt the pulse of the storm that was about to hit. The fishermen, the families, the children, all of them carried on with their daily routines, unaware of the power that had been awakened in the fjord, of the creature that now lay at the heart of it all. The fisherman knew, however, that the time for ignorance had passed. The storm was coming, and it would bring with it a reckoning that could not be avoided. The creature's words had been clear. The balance had been disturbed. The ancient forces beneath the water had been awakened, and now the world was shifting, unraveling, in ways that no one could have foreseen. It was up to him, the fisherman, to understand the truth, to learn what was needed to restore that balance, to face the coming tide with courage, for there was no more running from it. He had been chosen, marked, and now it was his responsibility to walk the path set before him, no matter how treacherous or unknown. As he entered the village, he was greeted by familiar faces, his neighbors, his friends, the people who had shared his life and his work by the fjord. They smiled, unaware of the storm in his heart, of the burden that weighed him down. They saw only the fisherman who had always been there, who had spent his life casting nets and catching fish, living simply and contentedly. But the fisherman was no longer the same. He had glimpsed the depths of something far greater than he could have ever imagined, and now he was bound to it. The creature in the water had changed him, had shown him a world that existed beyond the surface, a world of ancient powers and forgotten truths. The life he had known, the life of the village, would soon be swept away in the tide, and he would be caught in the middle, tasked with something greater than survival. As he made his way to the hearth, where the fire crackled warmly, the sense of urgency gnawed at him, reminding him that time was slipping away. The creature had spoken of cycles, of a time when the tides would rise and the world would change. That time was now. The fisherman could feel it in the air, the electric charge of something momentous about to unfold. He could hear the faintest rumble of thunder in the distance, the winds picking up, the waves growing restless. The world was awakening, and with it the storm that had been foretold. He sat down at the table, his hands clasped together, the weight of the knowledge heavy on his shoulders. The villagers continued their conversation around him, but he was no longer a part of it. His thoughts were consumed by the creature's words, by the knowledge he had been given, by the task that lay ahead. The time had come to face the rising tide, to confront the storm and all that it represented. As the sky darkened and the wind began to howl outside, the fisherman felt a deep sense of foreboding settle in his chest. The storm was not just a force of nature. It was a symbol, a manifestation of the forces that had been set in motion. The balance had been disturbed, and now the world would pay the price. It was up to him to restore that balance, to face the ancient powers that had awoken from their slumber, to protect the village and all that he held dear. The time for hesitation was over. The fisherman rose from his seat, determination in his eyes. He knew what he had to do. The path ahead would not be easy, and the road would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but he would walk it with courage. The storm was coming, and it would test him in ways he could not yet comprehend. But he was ready. The rising tide was not just a metaphor. It was a literal and figurative force that would sweep through the world, changing everything in its wake. And the fisherman would stand at the center of it all, a humble man with an extraordinary responsibility. The storm would come, and with it, a new world would rise. And he, the fisherman, would be the one to guide it. With a steady breath, he stepped outside, the cool wind biting at his skin, the first drops of rain falling from the sky. The village was quiet now, the people unaware of the storm that loomed, but the fisherman knew the truth. The rising tide was upon them, and nothing, not the village, not the fjord, not even the world itself, would ever be the same again. The storm had come as foretold, its winds howling like the cries of ancient spirits, shaking the foundations of the village and throwing the sea into turmoil. The fisherman, standing at the edge of the cliffs, looked out over the fjord, his heart pounding in his chest as the first waves of change began to crash against the shore. The water, once calm and serene, now churned violently, darkened by the rising storm, swirling with a force he had never seen before. In the distance, the mountain. Peaks that had always been his silent guardians were now shrouded in thick clouds, their jagged edges lost to the storm's fury. The creature's words echoed in his mind. The time of reckoning is here. He had hoped, in some quiet part of his soul, that it would not come to this, that the storm would pass, and the world would remain as it had always been. But now, standing at the precipice of the unknown, he knew that hope was a fragile thing, and the world he had once known was slipping away, replaced by something far darker, far more dangerous. His thoughts turned to the village, to the people who were still oblivious to the coming catastrophe. They were inside their homes, preparing for the storm in the usual way, boarding up windows, securing doors, and gathering around the hearth for warmth and safety. They did not yet understand the true nature of the danger that threatened them. This was not just a storm. It was the beginning of a great change, a shift in the balance of the world that would leave nothing untouched. The fisherman had no choice but to act. He turned from the cliffs and made his way down to the village, his steps quick and purposeful, his mind racing with the knowledge of what needed to be done. The villagers needed to be warned. They needed to understand what was coming. But how could he explain something so vast, so incomprehensible? How could he make them see the truth when they had lived their entire lives unaware of the forces at play beneath the surface? As he entered the village, the wind began to pick up, carrying with it the smell of salt and seaweed, the unmistakable scent of the ocean's fury. The first droplets of rain began to fall, soft at first, but quickly, growing heavier, soaking through his cloak. The villagers were already gathering in the main square. their faces filled with the usual mix of concern and confusion that came with a storm of this magnitude. The fisherman felt the weight of his task pressing upon him. He had to make them had to make them understand that this was no ordinary storm. He walked to the center of the square, where the elders were already discussing the storm's intensity, their voices raised in anxious murmurs. They looked at him as he approached, their expressions shifting from concern to curiosity as they recognized him. The fisherman stood there for a moment, gathering his thoughts, searching for the right words. How could he explain to them that this storm was not just a passing weather event, that it was the result of something far older, far more powerful, and far more dangerous than they could imagine? That it was not just the wind and rain they had to fear, but the very forces that governed the world itself, forces that had been disturbed and awakened by their own actions? He took a deep breath and began. "This storm is not like the others," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "It is the beginning of something much greater, something that we cannot control. The balance of nature has been disturbed, and the consequences are already upon us." The villagers looked at him in silence, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and confusion. The elders, who had seen many storms in their time, exchanged glances, as if unsure whether to take him seriously. "What do you mean, disturbed?" one of the elders asked, his voice skeptical. "Storms come and go. This is nothing new." The fisherman shook his head. "No," he replied, his voice growing more urgent. "This is not just a storm. It is a sign of the great forces that are awakening beneath the waves. The creature that resides in the deep, the one I have spoken of, is real, and it is rising. This storm is its calling, its first warning to the world." The villagers murmured among themselves, their voices tinged with skepticism, but there was a flicker of something else in their eyes, something between fear and understanding. The fisherman could see that some of them were beginning to grasp the gravity of his words, but others remained doubtful, unwilling to accept the truth that was unfolding before them. He knew he had to do more than speak. He had to show them, to make them see the storm for what it truly was, not just a force of nature, but a harbinger of something far more dangerous. "We have no time to waste," he said, his voice rising above the murmurs. "The creature will not wait. We must prepare. We must understand what it is, how to confront it, and what role each of us must play in this. The old ways are no longer enough. The storm is just the beginning. The real challenge is yet to come." A silence fell over the square, the weight of his words settling on the crowd. They could no longer pretend that this was just another storm. They could no longer ignore the truth that the fisherman had brought to their doorstep. The creature in the deep was real, and its awakening meant that the world they knew was changing irrevocably. As the storm raged on, the first true waves of change began to crash against the shores of the village. The fisherman knew that this was only the beginning. The rising tide was not just a metaphor. It was a literal and figurative force that would sweep through the world, changing everything in its wake. The creature was not simply an ancient force of nature. It was a living, breathing entity that had been disturbed by the actions of those who had come before him, and now it was rising to reclaim its place. The fisherman stood at the center of the square, surrounded by the villagers who were beginning to understand the enormity of what lay ahead. They were no longer just a community facing a storm. They were a people on the brink of an awakening, caught in the tide of change. They had been called, and now they would have to rise to meet the challenge that was coming for them. The storm howled louder, the wind whistling through the trees, the waves crashing against the shore with an intensity that mirrored the rising tension in the hearts of the villagers. The world was shifting, and they were powerless to stop it. All they could do was face it, as the fishermen had, and hope that they could survive the first waves of change. The wind had shifted, turning from the quiet whispers of the morning breeze into a forceful gust that carried with it the taste of salt and the promise of something far worse. The sea, once a calm and familiar companion to the village, now rose, in towering waves, crashing against the jagged cliffs with a ferocity that sent tremors through the earth beneath their feet. The fisherman stood at the edge of the shoreline, his weathered face etched with concern as he watched the storm's approach, feeling the weight of its power pressing down upon him. The sky, once a bright, clear blue, had darkened with clouds, thick and oppressive, swirling in a dance that mirrored the turmoil in his heart. In the distance, the figure of the creature, or perhaps it was a silhouette of something even darker, loomed ominously beneath the roiling waters, waiting to rise. Fully into the world it had once ruled. The storm was no longer just a natural occurrence. It was the herald of something much older, a force of nature unlike anything the villagers had ever known. The fisherman had spent his life studying the sea, the tides, and the creatures that swam beneath it, but nothing in all his years had prepared him for what he was witnessing now. His mind raced, remembering the ancient myths and warnings passed down from his ancestors. In those tales, the sea was alive, its depths teeming with power and secrets that could either sustain life or tear it asunder. Now, standing at the edge of the world he had known, he realized that those myths were not just stories. They were prophecies, and they were coming true before his eyes. The creature that had once slumbered in the deep, a force of nature so ancient that it was woven into the fabric of the world itself, was awakening, and with it, the storm that would tear apart everything they had built. The villagers had felt the storm's approach, of course, but they had not understood its true significance. They had prepared in the usual way, securing their homes, reinforcing their boats, and huddling together for warmth and safety. But this was not a storm like any other. This was the storm that would mark the beginning of the end of the world as they knew it. The fisherman turned back toward the village, his heart heavy with the knowledge that time was running out. There was no longer any point in pretending that they could weather this storm as they had weathered others. This was no natural disaster. It was the first wave of an awakening, an event that would change everything. As he walked back toward the village, he felt the ground beneath his feet tremble slightly, a subtle reminder of the power that was building beneath the surface, just out of sight. The villagers, still going about their preparations, did not notice, but the fisherman could feel it in his bones, the pulse of the earth, the thrum of the waves, the rhythmic beat of a world in turmoil. The time had come for them to face the truth. The village square was abuzz with activity when he arrived, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and smoke from the hearths. The elders were already discussing the storm's severity, their faces lined with worry, but none of them truly understood what was happening. They had no knowledge of the creature, the entity that had been disturbed and was now rising from the depths. They thought it was just a storm, just another sign of the unpredictable nature of the sea. The fisherman knew better. He stepped into the circle of elders, his presence commanding their attention. "This is not just a storm," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that only years of experience could lend. "This is the beginning of something far more dangerous. Something ancient is waking, and it is calling to the storm. We are not prepared for what is coming." The elders exchanged uneasy glances, their skepticism clear. "What do you mean by something ancient?" One of them asked, his tone dismissive. "It's just a storm, nothing we can't handle." The fisherman's gaze hardened. "No, you don't. Understand, this is no ordinary storm. It is a warning, a herald of the creature that slumbers beneath the sea. The one I have warned you about. It has been disturbed, and now it is waking. The storm is just the beginning." For a moment, there was silence. The villagers, who had gathered around to listen, looked at each other, uncertain. The fisherman's words had struck a chord, but they could not yet fully grasp the magnitude of the danger. He could see it in their eyes. They still thought it was just an old man's tale, a story spun to explain the unexplainable. But they were wrong. The storm raged on, growing stronger by the moment. The sky above had darkened completely, and the waves crashed violently against the shore, sending spray high into the air. The wind howled, a constant, deafening roar that drowned out everything else. "We don't have time to explain," the fisherman said, his voice rising above the din of the storm. "We need to prepare. We need to leave. We cannot stay here and wait for this creature to rise. It will destroy everything in its path, and if we do not act now, we will be caught in its wake." The villagers stood frozen, torn between disbelief and fear. They had never seen the fisherman like this before. He was not a man prone to panic or wild stories. He was a man of the sea, grounded in reality. If he was this terrified, there was something they did not understand. The elders, however, still hesitated. "We cannot leave our homes," one of them said, his voice shaky. "The storm will pass. It always does." The fisherman shook his head. "You don't understand. This is not just a storm. This is a reckoning, a return of something that should never have been disturbed. If we do not leave now, we will be trapped here with no hope of survival." The villagers could see the fear in his eyes now, the raw, unfiltered fear of a man who had seen something that defied explanation. The first cracks of the storm's true power were beginning to show, and they could no longer ignore the truth. Reluctantly, the elders agreed, and the village began to prepare for the inevitable evacuation. The fishermen knew it was only a matter of time before the creature would rise from the depths and come for them. And when it did, there would be no place to hide. As they gathered what they could, securing boats, provisions, and any survivors who had not yet fled to higher ground, the storm continued to rage, its fury growing with every passing minute. It was as if the storm itself had become an extension of the creature's will, its waves carrying the weight of a world on the brink of destruction. And as the villagers retreated into the hills, the fishermen stood at the edge of the shore, watching the storm and the sea with a heavy heart, knew that this was only the beginning, that the world they had known was about to change forever, and that there was no turning back. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the water, the fisherman found himself drifting further into the fjord than he had intended, his mind consumed by the growing emptiness he felt inside. The boat glided through the calm waters, with a faint creak of the timbers, a sound he had grown accustomed to, yet now it seemed almost like a distant echo of a life that once had meaning. He had spent decades upon these waters, feeling the rhythm of the tides, listening to the subtle whispers of the ocean that guided his every movement. But today, the sea felt distant, as if the ocean had closed its ears to him, and all that remained was an endless expanse of blue. The fish, which had once flocked to his nets with an almost sacred loyalty, were becoming scarce. Where once the sea had offered its bounty freely, it now seemed to withhold its treasures, as though it too was tired, exhausted from the endless demands placed upon it. The nets, which had once been a symbol of hope, now felt like burdens, the weight of failure dragging them down with each passing hour. The sun, sinking ever lower, seemed to mirror the heavy weight that now rested on the fishermen's shoulders. The competition among the villagers had grown fierce, and the camaraderie of old was slipping away, replaced by a desperate hunger for success, a hunger that could never be sated. He had witnessed this shift, this erosion of the harmony that once bound them all together. No longer were they a community of people, working side by side in mutual respect for the sea. Instead, they had become competitors, each man vying for the greatest share of what remained. The fisherman's thoughts were interrupted by a distant cry of a seabird. its wings slicing through the air, a sharp contrast to the eerie stillness of the water below. The bird was a reminder of a time long past, a time when the sea had been abundant and full of life, when the fisherman's heart had been light with the promise of each new day on the water. But now there was only a lingering sense of dread, a knowing that things had changed forever. He had seen the signs, the subtle shifts in the tides, the faint changes in the winds, but he had chosen to ignore them, to hope that the balance would right itself. But the sea was no longer speaking to him the way it once had. His hands gripped the oars, the calluses on his palms, now a testament to the years of labor he had put in. Yet the satisfaction that had once come from the work was gone. His body was weary, his spirit exhausted, and the uncertainty that had taken root in his heart seemed to spread further with each passing moment. He was beginning to understand, too late perhaps, that the sea did not owe him anything. The ocean had always been a gift, one that came with no guarantees, one that demanded respect in return for its bounty. And yet, somewhere along the way, the fisherman had forgotten that simple truth. As he rowed silently through the water, the realization weighed on him like a stone in his chest. He had been taking more than he needed, pushing the limits of what the sea could provide. And now, the ocean had begun to pull back, showing him the consequences of his greed. It was not just the fish that had dwindled, but something deeper, something within him that had eroded over time. The community he had once known had fractured, the bonds of trust weakened by competition and envy, each man for himself, struggling to survive in a world that no longer seemed to offer its bounty freely. The fisherman felt a pang of guilt as he looked back toward the village. His neighbors were struggling as well, each one chasing after the same fleeting prize, trying to catch what was slipping through their fingers. He had once believed that there was enough for everyone, that the sea would always provide if they worked in harmony. But now, that belief felt naive, a relic of a simpler time. He had come to understand, painfully, that the sea was not endless, that the resources it provided were finite, and that there were limits to what it could give. It was a hard truth to accept, and one that he had resisted for far too long. As the boat glided through the water, he looked toward the distant shore, the lights of the village flickering in the twilight. There was no longer a sense of peace. In the familiar sight, no longer the comfort of knowing that he was part of something greater, something that transcended the individual. The fisherman knew that change was inevitable, that the world he had known was slipping away, but he did not know what would take its place. The sea had spoken, but he had not listened until it was too late. The oars dipped gently into the water, breaking the surface with a soft splash, a rhythm that had once been comforting, but now seemed hollow. His heart was heavy, weighed down by the knowledge that his actions, and those of his neighbors, had pushed the sea to the brink. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon, the fisherman felt a deep sense of loss, not just for the fish, but for the way of life. That was slipping away from him. He could no longer deny it. The reckoning had come, and it had come in the form of a silent, empty sea. The future was uncertain, and the fisherman knew that he would have to find a new way, a new balance between taking and giving, between survival and respect. But for now, as the boat drifted slowly back to the village, he allowed himself to reflect on the past, on the choices he had made, and on the understanding that it was never too late to change. But sometimes, change required letting go of the past and embracing a new way forward. The sea had taught him that lesson, but it had taken its toll. And as the night settled over the fjord, the fisherman knew that tomorrow the work would begin anew, but this time with a different understanding, a different respect for the ocean that had always been there, waiting for him to listen. The cold winds of the morning sliced through the air as the fisherman set out on the water once again, a steady determination in his movements. though his heart was heavy with the lessons of the past. The fjord stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, yet for the first time in a long while he felt a flicker of hope stir within him. The sea had been quiet for days now, offering no sign of the abundance it once provided, but the fisherman knew the rhythms of the tides, and with each passing day, a small part of him dared to believe that the balance between man and nature might be restored. His boat, though weathered and worn, seemed to carry a renewed sense of purpose as it cut through the cold water, the oars dipping in a steady, rhythmic motion. The nets lay folded at his feet, a silent promise of the work that awaited, but for now, the fisherman found solace in the simple act of moving forward, one stroke at a time. It was not the certainty of a bountiful catch that kept him going, but the quiet belief that by continuing, by respecting the sea and its cycles, he could find a way back to the harmony that had once existed. The days of greed and excess were behind him. He knew that now. The competition that had once driven him to race against his neighbors for the largest share had left a bitter taste, one he could not shake. But now, as he floated alone in the stillness of the fjord, the realization dawned upon him there was no need to compete. The sea would offer what it could, when it could, and the fisherman would be ready, not with an eager desire to take, but with a deep understanding of the value of patience, respect, and gratitude. As the boat moved further from the shore, the sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the quiet hum of the wind and the soft slap of water against the hull. The village had become a distant memory, not in the sense that it had ceased to exist, but because the fisherman had come to understand that the true value of his life was not measured by what he brought home each day, but by how he lived in the world, how he contributed to the delicate balance of nature and his community. The lessons of the past, painful as they were, had brought him to this place of clarity, and he was ready to face the future with a renewed sense of purpose. As he set the nets out into the water, he noticed the faintest ripple beneath the surface, a sign that the fish were moving, not in the large schools they once traveled in, but in small, scattered groups. It was a slow return, but it was a return nonetheless. The sea was healing, and with it, so too was the fisherman's spirit. He had learned that it was not enough to take from the ocean. He had to give back, to ensure that the delicate web above life remained intact. The fish that filled his nets would not be taken for granted. Each one would be handled with care, each catch a testament to the respect he now held for the natural world. With the sun climbing higher in the sky, the boat drifted deeper into the fjord, and the fisherman felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the sea, and to the life he had chosen. This was not the same life he had lived before, when the tides of competition and greed had dictated his every move. This was a life built on understanding, on harmony, and on the quiet wisdom that came from listening to the world around him. As the day wore on, the fisherman felt his heart lighten, not because of the catch he was slowly collecting, but because he knew that his journey was not just one of survival, but of redemption. He had been given another chance, and he was determined not to squander it. The lessons of the past, the scars of the earlier days, had shaped him into something new, something stronger, something more attuned to the rhythms of the world. The once harsh waters of the fjord now seemed to welcome him, as if the sea itself had forgiven him for the mistakes of the past and was offering him a way forward. With each pull of the net, with each ripple on the water, he felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a sense of lightness, of renewal. He had found his way back to the balance, back to the understanding that had once guided his ancestors. It was not about taking from the world, but about working with it, living in harmony with it, and respecting the delicate cycles that sustained life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold, the fisherman turned, the boat back toward the village. The catch was modest, but it was enough, and as he rowed back, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that he was on the right path. The future was still uncertain, but he knew that with patience, respect, and understanding, the balance between man and nature could be restored. The village, with its quiet hum of activity, awaited his return, and though the world around him had changed, the fisherman knew that the most important change had come within himself. The sea, once silent, was now speaking to him once more, not with the angry waves of a world out of balance, but with the calm, steady whispers of a world in the process of healing. And for the fisherman, that was enough. He had found his way back, and in doing so, had found his peace. Tomorrow, he would rise again, ready to face the challenges ahead, but this time with a heart full of gratitude and respect for the world around him. The sea had given him a second chance, and he would not waste it. As the cold wind carried whispers of the approaching winter, the fisherman found himself standing at the edge of the fjord, the familiar scent of salt water mingling with the crispness of the season's first frost. The world around him had changed, not just in the ways he could see with his eyes, but in the very air he breathed, the earth beneath his feet, and the water that stretched before him. It had been a long journey, one filled with quiet reflection, humility, and the willingness to change. The waves were no longer the wild, unpredictable forces they once seemed, but a constant rhythm that echoed the steady beat of his own heart. He had learned to listen to the sea, to understand its moods, and in doing so, he had learned to listen to himself. The journey had been painful at times, filled with moments of doubt, regret, and even fear. But as he stood there now, watching the sky turn a soft shade of purple as dusk fell over the fjord, the fisherman felt a deep sense of peace. It was not a peace born of ease or comfort, but a peace forged in the quiet fire of resilience. The past few years had been a testament to his transformation, and as he gazed out over the water, he realized that he was no longer the man he once was. The sea had given him much, but it had also taken, and with each loss, he had learned more about the delicate balance between taking and giving. He had learned that it was not enough to simply survive. He had to live in harmony with the world around him. His work had become a meditation, a daily prayer of sorts, where each action was an offering of gratitude for the gifts the ocean provided. There had been times when the sea had been silent, offering no bounty, and those were the times when the fisherman had to rely on more than just his skill. Those were the times when his heart had to be his compass, when patience and faith became the most important tools he had. He had learned to wait, not out of fear or resignation, but out of a deep understanding that the ocean would provide when the time was right. It was this new way of being that had allowed him to thrive, not just as a fisherman, but as a part of the world, interconnected with every living thing around him. As he moved back toward his boat, the oars resting against the side, his mind wandered to the village that had been his home for so many years. The people there, his family, his friends, had all watched him change, and though they had seen him struggle, they had also seen him rise again, each time stronger and more connected to the world around him. The changes in the fisherman were not just evident in the way he worked, but in the way he interacted with others, in the way he listened more and spoke less, in the way he shared what he had with those in need. He had become a quieter man, a more thoughtful man, a man who understood the importance of taking only what was necessary and giving freely what was abundant. The village itself had changed as well. The once bustling market, filled with goods, and bartering, now hummed with a quieter energy, with a greater focus on sustainability and community. The people, too, had learned the lessons of the sea, understanding that prosperity was not just about accumulation, but about balance, about giving back, and about working together. It was a lesson that had taken time to learn, but it was a lesson that had been embraced, not just by the fisherman, but by all who had witnessed the transformation. The fisherman's boat, weathered but strong, now felt like a symbol of that change. Each scar on its hull was a reminder of the storms it had weathered, not just on the water, but in life. It had been through times of plenty and times of scarcity, and yet it had always remained afloat, always moving forward, always seeking the horizon. The fisherman had come to see his boat as more than just a vessel for work. It had become a companion, a partner in the dance between man and sea. As he pushed off from the shore once more, the oars dipping into the cool water, he felt a deep connection to the world around him, to the village, to the ocean, and to the generations of fishermen who had come before him. They had taught him the ways of the sea, but it was the sea itself that had taught him the most important lesson of all, that life, like the tides, is a constant ebb and flow, a rhythm that must be respected and embraced. As the boat drifted farther into the fjord, the fisherman looked to the horizon, where the setting sun cast its final golden light over the water. The sea stretched out before him, vast and infinite, but for the first time, he did not feel small. In comparison, he felt a part of it, a part of the larger story that had been unfolding for generations. The lessons of the past had brought him here, but it was the choices he made now that would shape the future. With a steady hand, he guided the boat through the waters, trusting that the path ahead, though uncertain, would be one of harmony and balance. The waves lapped gently against the hull, the wind whispered in his ears, and the world seemed to pause for a moment, as if holding its breath in quiet anticipation. The fisherman knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face whatever came next, with a heart full of gratitude, a mind clear with purpose, and a spirit at peace with the world around him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own uncertainties, but he knew that he would face them with the same quiet strength that had carried him this far. The tides of change were ever present, but the fisherman had learned to navigate them with grace, and as he rowed back toward the village, he knew that no matter what the future held, he would never again be adrift in the vast ocean of uncertainty. The sea had taught him to trust, to wait, and to believe that the balance would always return, as long as he was willing to honor it. And with that thought, the fisherman smiled, his heart light and his spirit free, as the boat glided silently through the water toward home. The dawn broke over the horizon, casting its golden rays across the still waters of the fjord, and the fisherman, now more than just a man of the sea, but a guardian of its mysteries, felt the warmth of the morning sun touch his face. His boat, as familiar to him as the rhythm of his own heartbeat, rocked gently on the water's surface, a steadfast companion that had carried him through countless trials, both on the sea and in his own soul. It had been a long journey, one filled with hardship and loss, but also with lessons learned and wisdom gained. As he sat there, staring at the shimmering expanse of water before him, he could feel the weight of the years, but it no longer felt heavy. The burden he once carried with pride had now become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength that comes from facing adversity with an open heart and a quiet determination. The winds were light, the air crisp and invigorating, and as he adjusted his grip on the oars, he realized that today was different. It wasn't the changing season that made the difference, nor was it the calm that had settled over the fjord, but the shift that had occurred within him. The peace he had sought for so long was no longer something to be chased or earned. It was something he had found deep within himself, as natural and constant as the ebb and flow of the tides. His life, once driven by the need to prove himself, to conquer, to possess, had transformed into one of service, of giving back to the world that had given him so much. The catch that had once been the measure of his success was no longer his sole focus. Now it was the relationship he held with the sea, the deep and respectful bond that had been cultivated over years of hard work, reflection, and sacrifice. The fisherman had come to understand that it wasn't the quantity of the catch that mattered, but the way it was taken, the care with which it was handled, and the gratitude he offered for the opportunity to live in harmony with nature. He had learned the delicate balance between giving and receiving, between taking what was needed and leaving enough for the future, a lesson that had been passed down through generations of those who had come before him. But it had taken him time to learn, to move beyond the greed and impatience that had once clouded his judgment. The sea had no use for such things, and in the end, it was only by relinquishing them that he had found true freedom. Today, as he rode deeper into the fjord, he could feel the connection to the world around him more strongly than ever before. The birds that circled overhead, the rustling of the pine trees on the shore, the gentle lapping of the water against. The boat, it was all a part of him now, woven into the fabric of his being. And for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of belonging, not just to the village or to the sea, but to the very earth itself. He had once feared the isolation that came with his life, but now he saw it for what it truly was, an opportunity to listen, to learn, and to grow. As the boat glided silently through the water, the fisherman thought of the village, of the people he had known for so long, and how they too had changed. They had witnessed his transformation, just as he had, witnessed theirs, and together they had learned to live more sustainably, more consciously. The market was no longer filled with the bustle of competition, but with a quiet exchange where each person took only what was needed and shared what they could spare. There was no longer a rush to outdo one another, no longer a need to prove worth through accumulation. They had all come to understand that true prosperity lay not in possession, but in the health and well-being of the land, the sea, and each other. This was the future he had dreamed of, the one he'd worked toward without even realizing it. As the boat continued its slow journey through the fjord, the fisherman felt the pull of the past and the promise of the future. He had been shaped by his experiences, by the hardships and the victories, but he no longer felt bound by them. He was not the man he had once been, and he knew that he could never return to that life. The lessons of the sea had transformed him, and with each passing day, he grew more attuned to the delicate balance that governed the world around him. His thoughts were interrupted as a ripple in the water caught his attention. A school of fish moved beneath the surface, their silvery scales flashing in the sunlight. It was a sight he had seen countless times before, but today it felt different. It wasn't just a sign of abundance. It was a reminder that life, in all its forms, was cyclical. The sea had its rhythms, just as the land did, just as life itself did. And just as the tides would rise and fall, so too would the fisherman continue, to evolve, to grow, and to adapt. With a sense of reverence, he cast his nets into the water, watching as they spread gracefully across the surface, their delicate threads designed to gather only what was offered freely. There was no rush, no urgency. He knew that the sea would provide, not because he demanded it, but because he respected it. As the nets began to fill, the fisherman felt a quiet joy stir within him. It wasn't the thrill of the catch that brought him satisfaction, but the simple act of doing what he had always done, with the understanding that he was part of something much larger than himself. The rhythm of the oars, the pull of the nets, the feeling of the sun on his face, it was all part of the dance between man and nature, and for the first time, he felt fully in tune with it. As the sun began to set, casting its warm glow across the fjord, the fisherman made his way back to the village, his heart light and his spirit at peace. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that he was walking the right path, The lessons of the past had brought him here, and though he knew that there would be challenges ahead, he also knew that he had the strength and wisdom to face them. The tides of change were ever present, but the fisherman had learned how to navigate them, and he knew that, no matter what, the future would always bring a new dawn, full of promise and possibility. And as he rowed silently toward the shore, the world around him seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter in his journey to unfold. The wind was still, the fjord calm, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The fisherman, standing at the bow of his boat, felt the weight of the moment in the silence that surrounded him. It had been many years since the day he had first set out upon these waters, and so much had changed since then. He had learned through hardship and joy alike that the sea was a living thing, as much a part of him as his own heart. Now, as he cast his nets once more, he did so with a new understanding, one that stretched beyond the water's surface and into the very soul of the land. The land, his land, had always been a quiet companion, providing him with the resources he needed, asking little in return, yet always giving in abundance. But over the years, he had noticed subtle shifts. The seasons had become more erratic, the winds less predictable, and the harvests less generous than they once were. At first, he had chalked it up to simple happenstance, a passing disturbance in the natural order. But as the years passed and the changes continued, the fisherman began to sense something deeper, something that connected the changes in the sea to those on the land. The realization had been gradual, creeping into his awareness like the slow tide that rises unseen beneath the surface. It had begun with small things, a decrease in the number of fish that filled his nets, a faint scent of decay in the air after a heavy rainfall, the sight of wilting plants where once there had been lush fields. These were not mere coincidences, but signs that the delicate balance he had always relied upon was beginning to falter. But what could he do? He was only one man, and the sea was vast. The fisherman had always known that his livelihood depended on nature's whims, but this felt different. It was as if the land itself was crying out, as if it had grown tired of giving and was asking for something in return. It was then that the fisherman understood he had taken too much without giving enough. The village had flourished for generations, its people living in harmony with the land and the sea. But in recent years, they had become complacent, taking more than they needed, pushing the boundaries of what the earth could provide. In his quest to feed his family and community, the fisherman had contributed to a greater imbalance, one that stretched far beyond the edges of his small world. The realization was a bitter one, but it also brought a clarity he had never known. It was time for change. But how? As the fisherman sat at the edge of his boat, the nets glinting in the morning light, he knew that the answer was not to retreat, nor to turn his back on the very sea and land that had given him life. Instead, he needed to restore what had been taken. He needed to rebuild the connection, to find a way to give back to the earth as it had always given to him. It would not be easy. He had seen how the world had changed, how the people had changed. The days of endless abundance were gone, and the path ahead would require sacrifice and patience. But the fisherman was not one to shy away from hard work. He had lived his life on the edge of the sea, where every day was a test of his endurance, his resolve, and his will. This, too, he could face. He turned his boat back toward the shore, the wind now at his back, and with it came the first hint of change. It was not a dramatic shift, but a quiet promise that the future could still be shaped. The world might be shifting beneath his feet, but he could still choose to be a part of the change, to help steer it in a direction that honored the past, while looking toward a future that was sustainable, balanced, and kind. When he reached the shore, he gathered the villagers. Together, they would have to make hard choices. not just for their own survival, but for the future of the land and the sea. They would have to learn to live with less, to ask more from the earth than they had before, to become stewards of the land once again. The fisherman knew it would take time, but he also knew it was possible. It was a lesson he had learned on the water, that sometimes the greatest change comes not in grand gestures, but in the quiet decisions made each day, in the small acts of care and attention that, when added up over time, make all the difference. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fjord, the fisherman felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was not a burden of guilt, but of responsibility, a responsibility he was now ready to bear. The path ahead would be long, and it would require sacrifices, but it was also full of promise. He looked out at the sea, its surface now a mirror, reflecting the changing sky, and for the first time in years, he felt the deep, steady pulse of the earth beneath him. He was no longer just a man of the sea. He was part of the land as well, part of a greater cycle that had always been in motion and would continue long after he was gone. And in that moment, the fisherman understood. The land was awakening, and with it, a new dawn for all of them. As the seasons continued to unfold, the fishermen and the villagers began their journey toward a more harmonious existence with the land and sea that sustained them, each day marked by quiet determination and a shared sense of responsibility. It was not easy. This return to the roots of their ancestors, to a way of life that had once been a natural part of their daily rhythms but had slowly been forgotten in the pursuit of progress and growth. The landscape itself had begun to change, as if the earth was responding to their renewed efforts, its subtle cues now clearer than ever. The trees, once sparse and struggling to grow, were beginning to thrive again, their branches reaching skyward with a quiet strength. The fish, too, seemed to be returning to the waters in greater numbers, their scales flashing beneath the surface like a promise kept. But the journey was not without its challenges. There were days when the weight of what they were trying to accomplish seemed too heavy to bear, when the pressure to provide for their families, to keep the village fed and clothed, felt overwhelming. The world was still unpredictable, and the fishermen knew that the land would not give up its bounty freely, nor would the sea offer its harvest without a price. It would take time, perseverance, and a willingness to sacrifice the comforts of the past in order to build a future that was sustainable for generations to come. As the fisherman spent more time on the water, casting his nets with patience and care, he began to see the results of the village's efforts. The balance they had begun to restore was not perfect, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. He felt the deep connection between the sea and the land, the ebb and flow of the tides mirroring the rhythms of their own lives, each movement a reminder that they were part of something much greater than themselves. They were part of a cycle that had been turning for centuries, one that could not be stopped, but that could be shaped by their actions. The fisherman's hands, once rough and calloused from years of hard labor, were now gentle as he tended to his nets, weaving them with the same care that he now brought to every aspect of his life. The delicate task of mending the torn fibers was no longer just about preserving his livelihood, but about honoring the land that had given him everything. The same care went into every meal they prepared, every seed they planted in the soil, every tree they nurtured, each act of sustenance, now a sacred practice. The villagers had learned to listen to the land, to watch the sky and the sea, to understand the signs that had once been so familiar to their ancestors. They no longer took what they needed without thought, but asked for it with gratitude, with respect, and with an awareness of the deep interconnectedness of all life. A village had begun to flourish in a way it had not in many years. The crops grew taller, stronger, and the wild animals, once driven away by the encroachment of human settlements, now roamed freely, adding their life force to the ever-expanding circle of life. It was a new beginning, one built on the foundation of lessons learned from the past. But even as the village seemed to thrive, the fishermen knew that there was no guarantee the balance would last. The world was unpredictable, and nature could not be controlled, but it could be respected. And as long as they continued to work with the land and sea, as long as they remained humble in the face of their dependence on the earth, he believed they could endure. In the quiet of the morning, as the fisherman stood at the edge of the water, watching the sun rise over the fjord, he felt the weight of his choices made not for himself, but for the future. He had learned through trial and error, through hardship and joy, that true abundance came not from taking, but from giving. Giving to the land, to the sea, and to each other. He had learned that it was the small acts, the ones that went unnoticed by the world at large, that had the power to create real change. And as the days passed and the village continued to grow, he knew that they were not just changing their own lives, they were changing the world. Slowly, surely, they were returning to the roots that had once sustained them, and in doing so, they were creating a future that would thrive long after they were gone. The road ahead would not always be easy, but the fishermen knew that they were no longer alone on it. They had each other, and they had the land and sea that had always been there, waiting for them to remember. With every passing day, the balance grew stronger, and with it, the hope for a better tomorrow. The sun continued to rise over the fjord, casting its warm light over the village, and for the first time in a long while, the fisherman allowed himself to believe that this time the cycle of life could be sustained. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that he would meet it with open hands, ready to give as much as he took, and to honor the earth in all the ways it had always deserved. And as he returned to his boat, setting out once more on the water, he felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest, knowing that they were on the right path together. As the village continued to flourish under the steady hands of the fisherman and his neighbors, the connection between them grew stronger, rooted not just in the work they did, but in the shared understanding of what it meant to live in harmony with the land and sea. In the quiet spaces of the village, there was a profound sense of unity, a belief that together they could withstand anything that came their way. The seasons cycled on, and with each turning of the earth, there was a deeper understanding among the villagers that their collective strength was the key to survival in a world that could be unpredictable and unforgiving. The fisherman, now seasoned in the rhythms of the land and sea, had become not just a provider for his family, but a leader in the village, guiding others in the quiet wisdom of living with respect for nature. His hands, though weathered by years of labor, now moved with an ease that reflected his understanding of the balance between taking from the earth and giving back to it. His presence was calm and steady, a pillar of strength in times of uncertainty. One of the most profound lessons the villagers had learned was that unity was not just about working together. It was about understanding that each individual was a vital part of a much larger whole. The fishermen understood this deeply. Every net cast, every tree planted, every grain of rice harvested was a reflection of a larger purpose. It wasn't about one person's success or failure, but about the community's collective effort to create a future for all. And it was this spirit of unity that allowed the village to face the challenges that arose, knowing that they could weather any storm, literal or figurative, as long as they remained steadfast in their commitment to one another. But it was not just the strength of the community that had brought them to this point. It was the wisdom that had been passed down from generation to generation, like a thread woven into the fabric of their lives. The elders, who had seen the world change in ways both big and small, had been the ones to remind the younger villagers of the importance of patience, of living in tune with the seasons, and of respecting the balance that the earth demanded. The children, who had grown up in the shadow of this wisdom, now carried it forward, learning from their elders as they learned from the land. The traditions, once fading and forgotten, had found a new life in the hearts of the younger generation, who were eager to take their place in the circle of life. And as the years passed, the village began to reflect this deep respect for tradition and unity. The fields flourished with crops that were harvested with care, the forests grew denser and more vibrant, and the waters teemed with fish once again. The village had found its place in the world, not as conquerors of nature, but as stewards, caretakers who worked alongside the earth rather than in opposition to it. In the evenings, when the work was done and the fires burned low in the hearths of their homes, the villagers would gather together to share meals, tell stories, and laugh with one another. It was in these moments, surrounded by friends and family, that the true power of their unity was most apparent. The bonds that held them together were not just about shared labor, they were about shared experiences, shared joy and shared love. For the world they had worked so hard to protect. It was here, in the warmth of these gatherings, that the fisherman found his peace. He had never asked for recognition or fame, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had played a part in something much greater than himself. The joy he felt was in the knowledge that the village would continue, not just for his generation, but for many generations to come. The fisherman's heart swelled with pride as he watched the younger villagers take their places, casting their nets and tending their fields with the same care that had been instilled in them. He had come to realize that his work would never truly end each day. Each season was simply another part of the ongoing cycle. But he was content in the knowledge that he had given everything he could, that he had shared his wisdom, and that the next generation would carry the torch forward. And as the village thrived, the fisherman could see the future clearly, a future rooted in respect for nature, in unity, and in the understanding that the earth would provide as long as they gave back. There were still challenges ahead, still storms to weather, but the village was strong, and its people were ready to face whatever came their way, knowing that together there was nothing they could not overcome. The unity of their community was their greatest strength, and the fishermen knew that as long as they held fast to one another, they would endure, just as the earth had endured for centuries before them. It was a new beginning, a return to the old ways, but with the wisdom of experience and the power of unity. The fisherman stood at the water's edge once more, looking out across the fjord, and he felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. The sun was setting on another day, but the promise of tomorrow remained. And as long as the villagers stood together, the future would always be bright. With his heart full of gratitude and hope, the fisherman turned back toward the village, knowing that the strength of their unity would carry them through whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but with each step, they were closer to the future they had dreamed of, a future where harmony with the land and sea was not just a dream, but a reality. And in the quiet of the evening, as the stars began to twinkle above, the fisherman felt the weight of his legacy, knowing that his work, his life, had been a small part of something much greater than himself. The evening air was cool as the fisherman, now aged and worn with time, stood at the edge of the fjord, his feet steady on the wooden dock that had supported him through countless seasons of work. The sun, a fading orange orb, hung low in the howl. Sky, casting a soft, golden hue across the water, which rippled gently under the fading light. His hands, though rough from years of labor, felt the steady pulse of the sea beneath him, as if the waters themselves recognized the approaching end of a long journey. He had been a part of this fjord for so long that it felt like an extension of his very soul, the land and sea woven together into a single thread of existence. The village, too, had grown with him over the years, evolving from a small, humble settlement into a thriving community, But the quiet wisdom he had shared with the younger generations would remain, like the ancient rhythms of the tides. The young men and women who once looked up to him, eager to hear his stories of the sea, now stood alongside him, their hands skilled with the nets, their eyes sharp with the knowledge of survival. They were no longer children, but seasoned fishermen. And women, their boats, just like his, bearing the marks of countless storms and hardships, yet still floating steady on the waters. It was a sign of the enduring strength of the community, a sign that the traditions would continue. He had watched them grow, these young souls, and knew that they would carry on what he had started. The sea, too, seemed to acknowledge the passing of time, its vast, eternal rhythm never changing, even as the world around it shifted. The boat that had carried him through so many years of fishing, through storms, through calm, was now resting. By the dock, its dark oak hull weathered and worn by the harsh northern seas. He ran a hand over its smooth surface, his fingers tracing the lines of age, of memories, of a lifetime of journeys shared. It had been more than a vessel. It had been a companion, a witness to every hardship, every triumph. The bond between man and boat was a deep one, forged through years of trust and understanding. And now, with a heavy heart, he knew it was time to let go. He would not sail her again. His body, tired from the years of hard labor, was ready for rest. His mind, too, was at peace, for he had fulfilled his purpose in this life. The village had grown strong. The next generation was ready to take its place, and the lessons of the sea had been passed down, as they always had been. The balance between taking and giving, the quiet respect for nature, the understanding that all things must come and go, these were the lessons he had taught, and they would continue to guide the people of this fjord long after he was gone. His heart was light as he turned away from the boat, glancing one last time at the shimmering waters of the fjord. The sun had finally dipped beneath the horizon, and the cool evening air began to settle around him. The village was quiet, its fires burning softly in the homes, the sound of children's laughter echoing faintly in the distance. It was a peaceful evening, the kind he had enjoyed countless times before, the kind he would never forget. He took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scents of the pine trees, the salt of the sea, and the earth beneath his feet. The world, it seemed, was still the same, and yet it was different. He had lived a full life, one rich with the rhythms of the seasons, with the quiet beauty of the land and sea. And now it was time to rest. The next generation would take over. The tides would continue to ebb and flow. The wind would continue to whisper through the trees. And the boat, weathered and warm, would remain as a testament to the years gone by. He turned toward the path that led to his home, his steps slow but sure. The night was falling, the stars beginning to twinkle in, the vast sky above. He felt no sadness, no longing for the past, only peace. He had lived his life with purpose, and now, as the stars appeared in the sky, he felt ready for the final journey. The village would carry on without him, just as it had always done. The sea would continue to call, and the boats would continue to sail. But for him, it was time to leave the world behind. The night was quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. He knew that the village, the sea, the land, everything he had known and loved would continue. Without him, the fire in his home was still burning, and the promise of a warm meal and a restful night awaited him. The last chapter of his journey was drawing to a close, and with it, he knew his time had come. He glanced back once more at the fjord, at the boat, at the life he had built, and with a deep breath, he stepped forward into the quiet embrace of the night, knowing that he had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would live on for generations to come. The final voyage had begun, not on the sea, but in the peace of his own heart, where the gentle rhythm of the world would carry him softly into the next life. And so, with the stars overhead and the quiet of the night around him, the fisherman's journey came to an end, not with a bang, but with a whisper.